Welcome back, brothers, to Warhammer. Tonight's story, we dive into the lore of the creation of the Primaris Space Marines. Before I get into that, be sure to like and comment any videos or topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from the upper. I want to thank you guys for the support. I've been killing it. Now, let's get to the madness.
The galaxy bled in silence. Not the silence of peace. There was no such silence left to mankind. This was the silence after screams had burned themselves empty, after Void War had spent its last torpedoes, after the dying had called for fathers, brothers, primarchs and gods, and only the cold had answered. Across the wounded Imperium, fleets drifted in ruin above worlds that no longer had names worth remembering. Battleships that had once carried the wrath of legions hung broken in orbit, their prows split open like butchered skulls, their gun decks exposed to the stars, their crews frozen in the act of prayer, or command, or terror. In the holds of dead troopships, armoured corpses floated in formation where gravity had failed. In the chapels of burned cruisers, ashes clung to reliquaries that had outlived the men who died defending them. The Horus heresy had ended. The Imperium had survived. Robert Guilliman knew those two truths were not the same. He had seen terror. He had seen the palace wounded and blackened, its walls scabbed with shell impact and blood. He had walked where demigods had murdered demigods, where loyalists had held against brothers who came bearing the eightfold mark of damnation. He had looked upon the throne world and understood that victory had not crowned mankind. It had shackled mankind to survival. The Emperor endured, entombed in golden torment. Horus was dead. Sanguinius was dead. Ferrus was dead. Too many sons were dead, and those who lived were sundered by grief, suspicion, and necessity. The legions had been mighty enough to conquer the stars. They had also been mighty enough to burn them. That was the truth Guilliman carried with him as his descent craft pierced the rust-coloured veil of Mars. The red planet turned beneath him like a wounded eye, its forges burning, its manufactoria roaring hymns of metal and heat into a sky stained by 10,000 fires. The Mechanicum had not escaped the heresy's blade. Civil war had gnawed through its priesthood. Forge had murdered Forge. Titan had slain Titan. Sacred engines that had once marched beneath banners of unity had ground one another into scrap beneath skies made toxic by their own wrath. Mars still lived, because Mars did not know how to die. Its wounds had been plated over, its dead had been inventoried, its traitors had been purged, hidden, recycled, or remembered in encrypted hate. From orbit, the planet appeared as it always had to those who did not understand it. A holy engine, red and eternal, breathing industry. Guilliman understood enough to know that beneath every forge smoke plume lay secrets, and beneath every secret lay a deeper one defended by oath, murder, and machine logic. His craft passed between towers crowned with antennae and statues of steel saints. Servo skulls swept through the air around the landing field, their eye lenses clicking as they scanned him, recognized him, and dipped in jerking reverence. Skitari cohorts stood in perfect rows along the causeway, galvanic rifles locked to their breastplates, red robes snapping in the furnace wind. They did not cheer. The Mechanicum did not waste sound on mortal displays unless sound itself served a function. Guilliman stepped down from the ramp in blue warplate, still marked by the smoke of recent battles. The gold upon his armor had been polished, but not enough to erase the faint scars of war. He carried no helmet. Let them see his face. Let the machine priests look upon a Primarch and decide whether they saw the Emperor's son, a biological masterwork, a political necessity, or a dangerous variable. He was all of those things. A procession waited beneath the arch of a half-ruined basilica engine. Red-robed adepts bowed on clicking limbs. Incense burners swung from servo arms, vomiting coils of chemical fragrance over the smell of hot metal, oil, and old blood. At the center of the gathering stood a creature who had once been human only by origin, not by present fact. Belisarius Cawl inclined his many-eyed head. He was vast, draped in crimson and black, his true body hidden beneath layered robes, armored plating, sacred cabling, and the restless motion of mechadendrites. Some ended in surgical claws, others in auspex needles, data spikes, weapon muzzles, or delicate manipulators finer than a human nerve. His lenses studied Guilliman with predatory reverence. His voice emerged in a layered metallic chorus, some tones audible, others scraping at the edge of perception as bursts of binharic data chattered beneath each word. "My Lord Primarch, the Omnissiah's design is honored by your presence." Guilliman regarded him for several heartbeats. "Archmagos Cawl. I retain that designation, among others. I know enough of you to know that names are another form of machinery." A ripple passed through Cowl's attendant priesthood. It might have been amusement, it might have been alarm. With the servants of Mars, the difference was often academic. Cowl's head tilted. "Efficiently stated, my lord. Take me below." The descent began through gates that had not opened for any ordinary servant of the Imperium since before the first shots of the heresy. Guilliman walked through layers of security older than many planetary dynasties. Adamantium doors parted after gene locks tasted his blood. Cogitator choirs screamed binharic psalms through vox grills as they confirmed his identity again and again, as though some part of Mars could not believe a son of the Emperor had come to walk its hidden arteries. Elevators sank through strata of iron, stone, data vault, and buried war engine. At times the walls opened onto abyssal manufactoria where priesthoods labored around reactors large enough to swallow cities. At other levels, Guilliman saw only darkness, broken by the red glimmer of sensor eyes watching from alcoves. Cawl did not hurry. He rolled, strode and flowed beside him on a concealed assembly of limbs and anti-grav suspensors, his robes whispering over the black metal floor. "You have seen the tally," Guilliman said. "I have consumed many tallies. The legions are broken." "Reduced," Cawl corrected. "Broken implies loss beyond function. The remaining Adeptus Astartes assets retain immense combat capacity." Guilliman's eyes hardened. "Do not play at ignorance." "Never, my lord. I reserve play for simulations, subordinate minds, and political theologians." They passed beneath an archway decorated with skulls set in brass. Each skull had a cable running from its crown into the wall. Some still moved their jaws in silent recitation. "The legions cannot remain as they were," Guilliman said. "No force of such scale can be permitted to exist again under one will, not even a loyal will. We have paid for that lesson in blood enough to drown terror. Yes, the chapters will be smaller, divided, bound by law, doctrine, and mutual limitation. Elegant containment, militarily inefficient. Necessary. Necessity is often inefficient." Guilliman stopped at the end of the corridor. Ahead lay a final vault door without ornament, without icon, without declaration. It was a slab of black adamantium veined with luminous circuitry. Cawl extended 3 mechadendrites into 3 separate ports. The door tasted his authority and opened with a sound like a continent exhaling. Cold breathed from within. The vault beyond was not a chamber. It was a buried kingdom. Gene vats stood in endless ranks beneath a ceiling lost in shadow. Surgical engines hung like iron insects over marble slabs. Servitors moved with dead precision, pushing carts filled with sealed organs, bone segments, nutrient cylinders, and failed tissue masses preserved for study. Red-robed adepts worked at stations surrounded by hololithic displays of anatomy, gene code, and combat projections. Servo skulls drifted through the gloom, carrying vials of blood in silver claws. Reliquaries lined the walls, each sealed behind stasis fields and layered wards of machine script. Within some lay preserved gene seed organs. Within others rested samples Guilliman recognized by instinct before conscious thought. Primarch-derived genetic material, his father's science, his brother's legacy, the raw fire from which demigods had been made and damned. At the center of the vault stood a stasis dais beneath a canopy of gold and black iron. Suspended within its field was a casket no longer than a warrior's arm, covered in seals, sigils, purity script, and Martian warning glyphs. Guilliman knew it by the dread with which Cowl's priesthood refused to look directly at it. "The Sang Primus Portum," Cawl said. His voice had changed. The arrogance remained, but beneath it lay something like hunger made devotional. Guilliman approached the dais. The air around the relic hummed against his teeth. "A key," he said. "A scripture," Cawl replied. "A weapon, a map of divine biological intention, a treasury of Primarch essence and possibility, a locked door, and the means to violate it with reverence. You speak of violation too easily. I speak of function." Guilliman turned to face him. Around them, the gene labs continued their work. A body thrashed in one of the nearer suspension tanks. It had once been an aspirant. It still had the outline of youth, though swollen muscle and malformed bone had dragged it away from humanity. Its ribs pushed against translucent skin in jagged ridges. A second heartbeat visibly beneath the sternum, too fast, too strong, hammering until blood clouded the amniotic fluid. A surgical servitor watched without pity. When the body convulsed and split along the throat, the servitor recorded the failure, opened the tank, and began removal. No prayer, no pause, no name. Another scream rose farther down the chamber, quickly cut short by injected sedatives or death. Guilliman's expression did not change, but something in his eyes chilled. "How many?" Cowl's lenses rotated. "Define parameters." "How many dead? Current series, prior series, projected series, or all biological expenditures since initial feasibility?" "Do not make me ask again." Cawl paused. For the first time, the machines around him seemed to still, enough to establish the boundaries of failure. Guilliman looked back at the dying aspirant being removed from the tank. Its skull had grown too thick along one side. Its jaw hung open. Blood and nutrient gel spilled from its mouth as the servitor lowered it onto a slab. Servo arms descended at once to harvest what remained useful. "These are boys. They are candidates. They are sons of mankind. They are material from which mankind may continue to possess sons at all." The words struck harder than they should have, because Guilliman knew there was truth inside them. That was the horror of Mars. Its monsters were not always wrong. He walked deeper into the laboratory kingdom. Cawl followed. They passed vats where organs pulsed in isolation, hearts beating without bodies, lungs flexing in fluid, black carapace cultures spreading like oil across synthetic flesh. They passed aspirants with their spines opened and threaded with metallic sockets. They passed corpses whose bones had outgrown their skin. They passed living subjects whose eyes flickered under hypno-indoctrination, their lips moving soundlessly as doctrine, target recognition, language, hatred, obedience, and war were hammered into their dreams. Every failure was recorded. Every spasm became data. Every ruined body contributed to the next adjustment. Guilliman could see it in the flow of the adepts, in the cold discipline of Cowl's design. This place was not a charnel house by accident. It was a cathedral of iteration. At last, Guilliman stopped before a vast hololithic projection. It showed the form of an Adeptus Astartes, then another outline overlaid upon it, taller, denser, altered by additions too precise to be mutation and too deliberate to be mere repair. Cawl waited. Guilliman spoke quietly. "The Emperor made the Angels of Death to conquer the galaxy. Yes. They conquered it. Yes. And then half of them turned upon him. Yes. I will not unleash another Legion-scale catastrophe upon mankind. I will not replace one species of demigod tyranny with another. I will not permit a second empire of transhuman warlords to grow in the shadow of the first." Cowl's mechadendrites stirred, eager as serpents. Then define the constraint, my lord. Improve them. The laboratory seemed to listen. Guilliman continued, each word cut from iron. Not for conquest, not for glory, not for the vanity of Mars, nor the pride of gene lines, nor the hunger of commanders who believe themselves fit to rule because they are difficult to kill. Improve the Emperor's angels of death so that they may preserve what remains. Make them stronger if strength is required, more stable if stability can be achieved, more enduring if endurance is the price of survival. But they will serve chapters. They will serve mankind. They will be bound by law and doctrine. They will not become the legions reborn. Cawl's many eyes burned red, green, and white. The Omnisire did not forbid perfection, my lord. Lesser minds merely fear its cost. You will fear mine if you misunderstand me. Misunderstanding is unlikely. Ambition is not. No, Cawl admitted. Ambition is present in sufficient quantity. For a moment, Guilliman almost smiled. It never reached his face. You accept? Cawl lowered himself, not quite kneeling, but performing a complex bow of machine and flesh that might have meant submission or calculation. With Cawl, even reverence had edges. I accept the sacred impossibility. I accept the burden of refinement. I accept the long labor, the sealed oath, the hidden vault, the corpse ledger, and the eventual accusation of blasphemy. I accept because the alternative is stagnation, and stagnation is death reciting itself slowly. Guilliman stared at him. You will keep this work hidden? Yes. You will answer to me? Yes. You will not exceed the boundaries I have set. Cowl's silence lasted half a breath too long. My lord, he said at last, boundaries are most useful when studied closely. Cawl, I hear and obey. There it was, the answer of every servant who might one day become a danger. Guilliman heard it. He marked it. He also knew he needed it. Beyond them, another aspirant died. His back arched until his spine snapped loud enough to echo through the chamber. A servitor logged the death. An adept adjusted a rune. Somewhere in the vault, a machine began printing a corrected sequence. Guilliman turned away. I go to war, he said. There is too much yet undone. There will always be too much undone. That is why I am giving this to you. Cawl inclined his head again. Then I shall make of time a forge. Guilliman took one last look at the Sancprimus Portum, a relic, a temptation, a weapon placed in the hands of a mind brilliant enough to use it and dangerous enough to enjoy doing so. He should have destroyed it. He should have sealed Cawl with it and set custodians at the door until the stars went cold. Instead, he walked from the vault because the Imperium needed monsters that still answered to command. The doors closed behind him one by one as he ascended toward the war above. Mars roared around him. Terror waited. The broken Imperium waited. Fulgrim waited somewhere in the venomous paths of fate, though Guilliman did not know it yet. He did not know that he would fall before the Phoenician's blade. He did not know that 10,000 years of darkness would pass. He did not know that the empire he had bled to preserve would become a cathedral built over a corpse, praying to a father who could no longer answer in any voice men understood. Beneath Mars, Belisarius Cawl remained with the dead, the unborn, and the forbidden. He turned back to the ranks of Vats, to the failures, to the relic, to the gene code of demigods and the screaming arithmetic of survival. His mechadendrites spread like the limbs of some Martian saint rendered in steel. Resume all sequences, he commanded. The adepts obeyed. Fluids churned. Surgical engines descended. Servo skulls spun through the cold air. Another aspirant opened his eyes inside the amniotic murk and began to scream around the tubes in his throat. Cawl watched the data bloom. 10,000 years, he whispered to the sealed vaults, is an acceptable margin of delay. Time did not pass beneath Mars. It was butchered, measured, sanctified, and spent. Above the vaults, empires rose in the dust of other empires. Chapter keeps were raised upon death worlds and fortress moons. Foundings were decreed by men who had never heard the emperor speak. Saints were born, burned, canonized and forgotten by the administratum that misfiled their miracles. Wars consumed sectors. Crusades departed in glory and returned as scraps of wreckage, or did not return at all. Forge worlds changed masters. Tombs were opened. Alien dynasties stirred. The warp gnawed at the skin of reality with patient teeth. Beneath Mars, the work continued. The hidden laboratories of Belisarius Cawl did not know dawn. They knew lumen strips and reactor glare, the red pulse of warning runes, the white shine of surgical lamps reflected in wet organs. They knew the scrape of bone saws, the hiss of nutrient tanks, the chattering worship of data engines, and the binharic dirges of adepts who had given away their voices in exchange for cleaner obedience. They knew the stink of amniotic, fluid, electro-burned flesh, antiseptic oils, and cooked blood. They knew failure by weight, by volume, by genetic deviation, and by how much nutrient slurry could be rendered from what remained. Time was measured in graft cycles, in harvested gene seed, in aspirant cohorts, in amended sequences, in vats drained and refilled, in screams that began as terror and ended as data. Magos Biologis Historgan 9 stood upon a gantry of black iron overlooking the latest chamber of trials. He had replaced his eyes with a cluster of wet red lenses that rotated independently within a brass mask. His spine was a tower of segmented steel. His hands were no longer hands, but delicate arrays of needles, clamps, and injector spines, each tool twitching with insect precision. A robe of dark crimson hung from his shoulders, stiff with old chemical stains. He had once possessed a human pulse. He considered its absence an improvement. Below him, the aspirants convulsed. They hung in upright suspension cradles, pale bodies opened and threaded with tubes. Most had been taken from bloodlines selected across generations by predictive scrutiny, tithe records, battlefield survivals, and gene marker purity. Their names existed in secondary archives, attached to skull measurements, endocrine stability, and compatibility forecasts. To Historgan 9, a name was a temporary label applied to mobile tissue, until that tissue either became useful or ceased being worth notation. The current series was failing. Subject Halvorn aspirated blood into both lungs when the Biscopea surge overfed his musculature. His chest expanded with grotesque speed. The ribs could not contain the growth. Bones split through his flesh in jagged white arcs, tearing the skin from within as though a cage of knives had decided to bloom. His eyes opened. He tried to scream. The tube in his throat rendered the sound into a bubbling animal pulse. Deviation useful, Historgan 9 said. A scribe servitor beside him punched the assessment into a data slate with fingers made of quills and wire. Subject Maverick survived the growth surge, but died when his secondary heart tore itself free of its supporting vessels. It beat for 7 seconds outside the ruined cradle of his ribs, hanging by strings of red meat, before a surgical arm removed it for study. His primary heart continued in panic, hammering blood through ruptures until the body emptied itself into the drain grates. Cardiac anchorage insufficient, Historgan 9 recorded. Useful deviation. Subject Oridan did not die physically at first. His flesh endured. His bones endured. The new reinforcement filaments held. His organs accepted implantation. But his mind burned away beneath the hypno-indoctrination engine. The device above his skull fed him battle doctrine, threat recognition, controlled aggression, squad hierarchy, oath cycles, void emergency rights, xenocide imperatives, heretic identification canticles, and layered loyalty commands. His brain accepted too much too quickly. Neurons fired in radiant overload. Blood leaked from his ears. His jaw locked hard enough to crack molars. When the engine disengaged, the body remained alive, staring forward, mouth open, soul absent. Historgan 9 watched without pity. Cognitive vessel annihilated, indoctrination pressure to be reduced by fractional increment, useful deviation. Servitors descended into the chamber. They were corpse things in surgical harness, their skulls half sawn away to house obedience engines, their mouths stitched shut to prevent vestigial prayers. They unfastened the dead from cradles and dragged them across the floor. The bodies left long red smears that were quickly swallowed by drainage channels. Flesh unsuitable for preservation went to rendering. Organs went to analysis. Bone went to density comparison. Blood went to chemical scrutiny. Nothing was wasted. Waste was a sin. Sentiment was a greater one. From the dark at the rear of the gantry, Belisarius Cawl watched. He had changed over the centuries, though change in him was not decay so much as accumulation. He had gathered additional limbs, additional memories, additional voices. His form had become less a body than a procession of machinery that happened to move as one will. Mechadendrites hung around him like a saint's iron halo. Some whispered prayers to the Omnissiah. Others tasted the air for hormonal traces from the dying below. His lenses flashed with the reflections of gene maps. "You slow the pressure too greatly," Kale said. Historgan 9 turned one lens upward. Survival probability increases with reduced indoctrination force. Survival without sufficient obedience is mutation wearing a loyal face. Excess force produces neural vitrification. Then the mind must be made capable of enduring command, not the command softened to suit the mind. Historgan 9 absorbed the correction. Acknowledged. Below them, another body began to fail. A growth plate along the spine distorted, forcing the aspirant's back into an impossible arch. His vertebrae cracked one after another, small wet sounds beneath the machinery. Cawl did not look away. "The Emperor's work was conquest," he said, not to Historgan 9 alone, but to the chamber, to the machines, to the ghosts of every dead aspirant ground into usefulness. Mine must be endurance. Conquest may tolerate brilliance with instability. Endurance cannot. These warriors must not merely kill. They must persist. They must be wounded beyond sane function and rise. They must cross radiation, plague, void exposure, poison, despair, disbelief, and still advance. They must hear the galaxy pronounce mankind dead and answer with disciplined fire. Aspirant survivability remains below desired threshold. Yes, thus we refine. The first great correction came wrapped in steel and pain. They called the coils sinew, because lesser minds required names they could picture. In truth, they were not simple coils, not wires, not crude augmentics shoved into meat. They were engineered bundles of durametallic fiber and reactive reinforcement, woven through the growing body's musculoskeletal structure until flesh and sacred mechanism learned to share force. The sinew coils did not replace muscle. They humiliated it into becoming more. They held bone in alignment when impact should have shattered it. They lent strength without the clumsy degradation of external bionics. They made the aspirant's body a cathedral reinforced from within. The early subjects died beautifully. Their muscles contracted against the new lattice with catastrophic force. Femurs cracked, tendons ripped free. One aspirant tore both shoulders apart, trying to obey an involuntary motor command. Another crushed his own ribcage inward during a seizure, his reinforced musculature folding him around his organs like a closing fist. Historgan 9 recorded every death. Cawl adjusted every line of code, every protein cue, every nerve interface. Then one survived. He stood trembling beneath the surgical frame, not yet a warrior, not yet anything but a skinless proof of concept. Blood ran down his legs. His hands opened and closed. The restraints groaned as he pulled against them. Cawl watched the strain readouts climb past the old limits of the Adeptus Astartes and continue rising. "Acceptable," he said. The second correction came not as reinforcement, but as command over becoming. The Magnificat was smaller than its importance deserved. It was an organ of regulation, amplification, and terrible authority, a secret sovereign placed within the architecture of the transhuman body. Through it, growth signals sang louder. Existing implants functioned with increased harmony. The aspirant became not merely larger, but more coherently vast. His bones thickened with purpose rather than frenzy. His muscles layered without consuming themselves. His organs spoke to one another in chemical hierarchies more stable than the crude shouting of earlier trials. The first Magnificat subjects failed in subtler ways. Some grew too fast for the mind to accept. They woke in panic, trapped inside bodies that no longer obeyed childhood memory, and battered themselves bloody against restraint frames. Some became feverish furnaces of runaway hormones, swelling until skin split and blackened. Some endured the physical transformation, only to reject hypno-indoctrination, their enlarged brains turning discipline into recursive madness. They recited Codex doctrine until their tongues bled. They identified every figure in the chamber as enemy, ally, superior officer, and self at once. Servitors executed them with cranial bolts. Useful deviations, Historgan 9 said, again and again, until the words became prayer. Cawl accepted each failure with the patience of continental drift. Conservative authorities of Mars did not. Their accusations came through sealed channels and encrypted councils. Holographic forms appeared in the vault's inner sanctum, red-robed, masked, sanctimonious, with the courage of distance. Fabricator locums, gene wardens, doctrinal auditors, and logic priests of ossified mind gathered as flickering phantoms around Cawl, while below them boys died for a future none of the accusers had the imagination to deserve. "You innovate beyond sanction," one declared. "I obey a Primarch's command," Cawl replied. "The Primarch is absent. The command remains. You profane the Emperor's design. I preserve its function. You presume improvement. I observe necessity. Creation outside established template invites techno-heresy." Cawl's many eyes brightened. His voice became gentle, which in him was more threatening than anger. "Survival is older than dogma. Before Scripture, there was the first organism refusing death. Before the first Martian rite, there was the first hand raised against extinction. You clutch at procedure as though procedure will hold the galaxy together. It will not. The enemy mutates. The Xenos adapt. The warp hungers without doctrinal approval. If mankind refuses refinement, mankind has chosen the manner of its own butchery. You speak as if fear is wisdom." "No," Cawl said. "I speak as if your fear is expensive." The council threatened censure. Cawl buried the record. They demanded oversight. Cawl gave them curated successes and sterilized lies. They invoked the Omnissiah. Cawl answered in canticles so old that two of them fell silent, unable to prove whether he had quoted scripture or manufactured it in their presence. The work continued. The third correction was born from the simple observation that death was often administratively premature. A space marine could suffer wounds that would reduce mortal soldiers to meat and still fight. That was known. That was sacred. That was insufficient. Cawl wanted a threshold beyond the threshold, a final ignition when trauma overwhelmed even transhuman endurance. Not healing, not resurrection. A fury of biological emergency, a hidden furnace that could flood the dying warrior with alchemical force, shock organs back toward function, clot ruin, burn toxins, lash the nervous system into obedience, and compel the body to continue killing when death had already written its claim. The Belisarian furnace was ugly in its early truth. It killed almost everyone. One subject suffered deliberate trauma to test activation. The furnace triggered too hot, boiling his blood inside his veins. Steam burst from his eyes. Another's furnace refused to ignite until post-mortem analysis, whereupon the corpse spasmed so violently it shattered the autopsy frame and killed a servitor before collapsing in a heap of torn muscle. Another woke during vivisection, heart ruined, lungs punctured, furnace blazing like a caged sun. He tore one arm free of its restraint and reached for Cawl with fingers slicked to the bone. Historgan 9 ordered termination. Cawl countermanded him. The aspirant died with his hand outstretched, not in fear, but in attack. Cowl's vox grill emitted a pleased static murmur. "There," he said, "that is closer." Centuries became millennia. Millennia became procedure. Then came Kale Vortigern. His origin mattered only insofar as it had been calculated. A bloodline marked across generations for ultramarines' compatibility, stable endocrine inheritance, acceptable skeletal symmetry, high aggression control, elevated pattern retention, ancestral records of soldiers, governors, void officers, and one executed rebel whose defiance, Cawl noted, suggested admirable will under impossible pressure. The boy was brought beneath Mars under sedation. His name followed him as a label in the data stacks. Kale Vortigern, male aspirant, viability promising, sentiment irrelevant. He woke once before the first incision. The ceiling above him was black iron. Servo skulls hovered like carrion birds. A surgical engine unfolded above his chest, each blade singing with sterilized light. He tried to move and found his limbs pinned. He tried to speak and found a tube already forcing his mouth open. A red-robed shape leaned over him. Historgan 9 studied him with rotating lenses. "You have been selected," the Magos said. "Do not interpret this as honor. Honor is a later stage conditioning. Reward. At present, you are opportunity." Kale's eyes widened. He was old enough to understand fear, not old enough to understand the scale of what had taken him. A deeper voice entered the chamber, layered and metallic. "Begin." Pain took him apart. They opened him with reverence and without mercy. They cut, implanted, sealed, waited, opened again. They taught his bones to thicken. They fed him organs with names older than his people's kings. They threaded sinew coils through him in glistening bundles. They placed the Magnificat and watched growth become command rather than riot. They installed the Belisarian furnace deep within him, like a secret threat against death itself. Kale survived. Others did not. Around him, aspirants ruptured, spasmed, drowned in their own fluids, bit through tongues, rejected organs, burned under indoctrination, or woke wrong and had to be put down. Servitors dragged them away from neighboring slabs. Historgan 9 recorded their deaths as useful deviations. Cawl watched Kale's readouts with increasing attention. "Again," Cawl said when a procedure succeeded. "Again," he said when Kale endured chemical stress. "Again," he said when Kale's heart stabilized under induced trauma. Pain became weather. Surgery became sleep. Sleep became war. The hypno-indoctrination engines took what remained of childhood and ground it beneath iron doctrine. Kale dreamed with his eyes open. He saw bolter drills repeated until the weapon became an extension of will. He learned firing solutions in vacuum, ash storm, jungle rot, hive smoke, and cathedral shadow. He learned void assault, maglock advance, breach discipline, decompression response, and how to kill in silence when sound could not travel. He learned demon anatomy, though the word anatomy felt like charity when applied to warp spawn. He learned where to aim when flesh lied. He learned that some enemies bled fire, some pus, some light, and some memories. He marched in dreams through codex formations, fire line, spearhead, refused flank, drop assault, urban clearance, decapitation strike, strategic withdrawal, though the engine whispered that withdrawal was not cowardice when commanded by victory's mathematics. He memorized oath cycles until they burned deeper than his own name. He watched pict feeds of traitor Astartes butchering loyalists. He watched orcs roaring beneath crude banners. He watched tyrannid organisms devouring trenches full of men. He watched Necron warriors rise from killing fire without haste. He watched Imperial guardsmen die in numbers too vast for grief, and understood, because the machine forced him to understand that he had been made to stand where they could not. Fear was shown to him, studied, named, disassembled, removed from command priority. Death was shown to him, studied, named, accepted, duty remained. Once, after a cycle of surgical fever and dream war, Kale woke. The chamber was dim. His cradle was upright. Cables ran from his spine, throat, wrists, and chest. Fluid drained from his skin in clear threads. He looked down and saw his hands. They were too large, not swollen, not malformed, made. The fingers flexed slowly, each movement heavy with strength he did not remember possessing. His forearms were corded with dense muscle beneath pale, scarred skin. Surgical seams crossed him like red scripture. Beneath his ribs, twin hearts beat in layered rhythm. One, then the other. A war drum and its echo. No, not only two. Deeper within him, something slept. He felt it without understanding. A pressure behind the hearts. A furnace organ coiled in silence, waiting for ruin, waiting for the moment when the body would be told it had died and would refuse the order. It felt like a reactor buried in flesh, like a beast behind a sealed door. He tried to speak. A vox pickup caught the wet rasp in his throat. Historgan 9 approached from the dark. Subject Kale Vortigern has achieved intermittent consciousness. Kale's eyes moved to the Magos. The words came slowly, torn from a throat trained more by tubes than speech. What am I? Historgan 9 paused, as if the question required consultation with available taxonomies. Unfinished. Cawl emerged behind him, enormous and many-limbed, lenses shining with reflected surgical light. Viable, Cawl corrected. Kale looked at the Archmagos. Something in him recognized authority. Something else recognized danger. Both instincts were permitted. Neither was permitted to become disobedience. Cawl leaned closer. You will sleep again, Kale Vortigern. When you wake in truth, the galaxy will have greater need of you than any world has ever had of any child. I am not a child, Kale whispered. No, Cawl said, almost fondly. Not anymore. The sedatives returned. The chamber dissolved. The war dreams resumed. More centuries died above them. At last, the vaults were full. Not with prototypes, not with failures, not with hopeful atrocities writhing in glass. Warriors, thousands upon thousands of them, sealed in stasis ranks beneath the skin of Mars, and in other vaults hidden where only Cawl's fractured mind could name them all. They stood armored in potential rather than ceramite, bodies perfected beyond the old threshold, minds layered with doctrine, souls hammered into weapons awaiting the hand of history. Sons of many gene lines, born from law, secrecy, blasphemy, necessity, and the long patience of a machine priest who believed extinction was an engineering problem. Kale Vortigern stood among them in silence, eyes closed, heart slowed to near stillness, the Belisarian furnace sleeping within him. Around him were brothers he had never met and already understood. A crusade without banners, an army without memory of war, yet filled with war's instructions. Cawl walked before the stasis ranks, his mechadendrites trailing over control altars and reliquary seals. Historgan 9 stood beside him. Activation protocols remain dormant, the Magos said. For now. Deployment authority absent. For now. Projected delay uncertain. Cawl looked upon the sleeping giants. His lenses clicked, narrowed, widened. In the cold glow, he resembled a prophet of iron standing before unborn thunder. Uncertainty is the galaxy admitting it has not yet caught up to me. One by one, the stasis fields brightened. Frost veiled the glass. The warriors vanished behind pale light, preserved between one heartbeat and the next. Not soldiers yet, not legends, not saviors. A sleeping crusade. Cawl raised a clawed limb in benediction over them all. Rest, he said. The Imperium will call when it has finished pretending it is not dying. Cadia died screaming, and its death scream reached worlds that had never seen its sky. On the astropathic relay world of Varan Secundus, the first sign was not light, it was blood. It ran from the mouths of the choir before any alarm bell sounded, before the watch adepts understood that the immaterium had shifted from storm to wound. The astropaths sat in their iron thrones beneath the cathedral spire, skulls shaved, eyes ruined by sanctioning, bodies wrapped in cables and parchment seals. They had sung messages across the void for centuries, tithe confirmations, crusade orders, death notices, pleas for ammunition, prayers encoded as command traffic. They had endured warp turbulence, demonic whispers, psychic backlash, and the slow erosion of minds used as lanterns in hell. They had never endured this. The choir began as one voice, a disciplined harmony of thought and agony, each sanctioned soul bound into the relay matrix by brass restraints and neural hooks. Then the song broke. One astropath arched against his throne, hard enough to crack his spine. Another vomited a stream of dark blood across his chest scrolls, while his ruined eyes wept light. The youngest of them, a thin man whose name had been erased when he was given to the Scholastica Sicana, began laughing in a voice that did not belong to him. His teeth shattered under the force of it. Shards spilled down his chin with the blood. Above them, the cathedral bells rang without hands. Adept Lurian Voss stood at the foot of the choir dais, clutching a data slate that had gone dead in his hands. He was a minor functionary, oath-bound to the relay station, old enough to know that panic wasted breath, and young enough to panic anyway. He had spent his life beneath stained glass images of the Emperor enthroned in gold, of saints raising swords, of space marines painted larger than mountains. He had believed, as much as any man could believe while counting ration ledgers and corpse quotas, that the Imperium was too vast to die. Then every astropath in the choir opened his mouth and screamed Cadia into the world. Not words, not at first. Images, a black fortress breaking, a planet cracking. Beneath impossible force, the eye of terror widening like a predator pupil, Cadia's pylons blazing and failing, guardsmen firing until their laser guns ran dry, then dying with bayonets buried in traitor throats, warships falling through atmosphere like burning cathedrals, the dead standing in trenches because there was no room left to fall. Abaddon's shadow cast across a world that refused to kneel until it had no bones left. Voss dropped his data slate. The choir screamed harder. Blood sprayed from ruptured throats. Brass restraints snapped. One astropath tore his own tongue free and continued screaming without it. In orbit, the relay world's navigator houses began dying. Their towers were sealed against light, sound, and common contamination, each spire a private empire of silk, ritual, mutation, and cold arrogance. Their third eyes had looked into the warp and guided ships through nightmare for generations. When the rift was born, those eyes saw too much. Servants found their masters clawing at their foreheads, nails ripping through flesh, trying to tear out the organ that had become a doorway for the impossible. Some succeeded. It did not save them. Their skulls split from within anyway, pale fire shining through bone as demonic laughter vibrated through shuttered halls. Ships in the system translated into the warp and did not return. Others returned immediately. They came back wrong. A pilgrim mass conveyor emerged inside the outer defense ring as a fused globe of metal, bone, and screaming steam. Its decks had folded into one another. Thousands of passengers had become a single mass, pressed through bulkheads and pews, hands protruding from the hull like pale weeds. A Navy frigate returned with its prow turned inward, its engines grown through the command bridge, its crew welded into their stations by meat and brass. One transport translated back into real space, already burning with green fire. Vox channels broadcasting sermons in the voices of dead children until the planetary guns destroyed it. The sky over Varan Secundus became a wound. The Astronomicon vanished. not dimmed, not obscured, gone. For worlds that had lived their whole lives beneath its psychic dawn, the absence was worse than darkness. Darkness had edges. Darkness could be lit by flame. The blackness had no boundary and no mercy. It entered navigation charts, shrine prayers, command protocols, and men's hearts. It turned distance into madness. It severed systems from one another. It swallowed desperate calls for aid and spat back echoes centuries old. It made the Imperium, that impossible empire of 1,000,000 worlds, into islands of meat surrounded by hell. The Noctis Eterna began. Across the galaxy, entire sectors became slaughter pits. On the hive world of Boraz, militia regiments barricaded the lower hab tiers with plasteel doors, corpse carts, and the bodies of their own dead. They ate corpse starch stamped with the aquila and drank recycled water that tasted of ash, urine, and machine oil. Above them, cultists wearing the skins of overseers beat drums made from ration barrels and human ribs. The militia commander, a man with one eye and a las pistol down to its last charge pack, told his men that reinforcements would come. He lied with discipline. The Vox had been dead for weeks. The sky had turned red. Something with too many arms was moving down through the manufactorum levels, and every time it roared, men forgot their own names. On the ash plains of Gathalamor's outer marches, Astra Militarum armored columns died beneath demon engines the size of hab blocks. Battle tanks fired until their barrels glowed white. Basilisks cracked the horizon with artillery thunder. Infantry advanced because the commissars ordered it, because the emperor demanded it, because there was no rear line left to retreat toward. A demon engine walked through them on legs of brass and muscle, crushing platoons into paste beneath cloven feet. Guardsmen disappeared under it by the hundreds. Those not crushed were torn apart by chain limbs, their blood steaming on metal hot from the warp. Still they fired. Still they shouted the Emperor's name through mouths full of dust and fear. On a rad-drowned forge moon, whose true name had been replaced by a numerical designation in the Mechanicus archives, Skitarii marched without voices into storms that peeled flesh from unaugmented bone. Their commanders had removed speech from them long before, replacing it with data pulses and obedience. They advanced in perfect ranks through lightning green with atomic poison, galvanic rifles raised, robes snapping around metal legs. Heretic engines came from the storm, wearing the faces of saints nailed to their hulls. The Skitarii did not curse. They did not pray aloud. They transmitted firing solutions while their flesh blackened beneath their rebreathers. When they died, their last data bursts were received, blessed and folded into the next volley. Everywhere, chaos did not arrive as an army. It arrived as infection. A dock worker with a headache opened an airlock to vacuum because a voice in his skull promised him wings. A planetary governor signed a surrender order in ink mixed with his children's blood and called it pragmatism. Plague fleets drifted into agri-systems, their hulls fat with rot, their arrival heralded by rain that curdled grain in the fields and made cattle birth human hands. Cornete hosts manifested in underhive arenas and turned crowd violence into sacrament. Sorcerous storms rolled over shrine worlds, peeling names from tombs and teaching statues to whisper. Renegade Astartes struck from the dark between stars, not to conquer alone, but to prove that the long war had never ended, that the traitor legions still remembered how to kill their father's empire, one world at a time. In the depths beneath Mars, the hidden vaults heard the galaxy die by increments, not with ears. Cawl's laboratories listened through astropathic absence, through warp pressure, through refugee data fragments, through distress calls that arrived broken, inverted, or impossibly old. Cogitators screamed in Binharic alarm as star charts rewrote themselves in failure red. Chapter worlds vanished from reliable contact. Forged tithe routes collapsed. Segmentum command structures became islands. Requests for aid arrived dated before the commanders sending them had been born, or from worlds already confirmed dead, or from ships whose wreckage had been catalogued by salvage crews 3 centuries earlier. Magos biologist Historgan 9 stood before a wall of living data and watched order become a corpse. Signal coherence loss exceeds all projected thresholds, he said. Cawl did not answer at once. His vast shape occupied the center of the strategium like a reliquary given predatory thought. Around him, servo skulls orbited in agitation. Mechadendrites stabbed into ports, drew out streams of information, tasted them, rejected them, demanded more. Red-robed adepts chanted machine litanies faster and faster, as if speed might become salvation. The Astronomicon? Historgan 9 asked. Occluded across major volumes, Cawl said. Absent across others, unreliable where present. The Emperor's light remains, but the galaxy has forgotten how to receive it in sufficient quantity. That is not a technical classification. It is an accurate one. More data arrived. A Black Templar's crusade fleet requesting reinforcement from a location now inside a warp storm. An Ultramarine successor. Chapter reporting catastrophic losses against plague forces. Then silence. A Mechanicus Ark begging for permission to abandon its Forge world. The request repeated in the same voice for 112 years after the Forge world's sun had died. A Blood Angels strike force calling for ammunition, gene seed extraction, evacuation, absolution, then only static filled with laughter. Historgan 9's lenses rotated. Imperial survival probability. Cawl absorbed the numbers before the subordinate Magos had finished the question. Terminal without intervention beyond known strategic capacity. Activation authority? Absent. Lord Guilliman. In transit through probabilities. Not yet present. Not yet enthroned in command. Not yet available for the asking of permission. Historgan 9 turned toward him. Then activation is premature. Cowl's lenses flared. Premature is a word used by minds that mistake clocks for reality. The galaxy is not waiting for ceremony. The command parameters established by the Primarch required authorized release. The Primarch required that the work serve mankind. Mankind is being dismembered. Therefore, the command has arrived in the only language history respects. Catastrophe. Correct. The probability engines below the strategium awoke. They were ancient devices, some of Cowl's own making, some stolen from forbidden archives, some whose origins he had edited out of all records because explanation would slow their use. They drank data until their casings steamed. They projected futures in jagged hololithic bursts. In most, terror burned. In others, Mars fell silent. In many, mankind survived as cattle, plague host, sacrifice, dust, memory. In almost none did the Imperium endure as an empire. Almost none was enough. Cawl watched the narrow paths where survival still twitched. Begin awakening protocols, he said. Historgan 9 did not hesitate again. By your will. Deep below, stasis fields that had held for millennia began to thaw. Kale Vortigern dreamed of surgery, and the dream cracked. He had been dreaming of war for 10,000 years, without knowing time had passed. In the dream, he stood in a void breach, with mag boots locked to a dying cruiser's hull, firing a bolt rifle he had never held in waking life. The enemy changed with every shot. Orc, traitor, demon, tyrannid, heretic, necron, cultist. The codex unfolded inside his skull as commandment and geometry. His heart's beat at combat rhythm. His hands knew recoil. His eyes knew target priority. He was calm because panic had been carved out of him before it could become habit. Then the dream filled with screaming. Not one scream. All of them. Cadia's last guns. Astropath choirs burning from within. Guardsmen crushed under iron feet. Skitari dying in radioactive silence. Hive militia praying over empty charge packs. Chapter serfs sealing monastery gates against traitor borders. Worlds calling for help into a void that had forgotten mercy. 10,000 years of war struck him as a single sound, vast enough to make identity tremble. His eyes opened. For one moment, Kale believed he was still on the surgical slab. He expected Historgan IX's lenses above him, the cold bite of instruments, Cawl's voice commanding another procedure. Instead, he stood upright within a stasis cradle, frost cracking across the transparent field before his face. His body felt immense, complete. Armored only in pale scars and restraint harness, he breathed for the first time in an age. His twin hearts struck once, then again, synchronizing with a deeper presence beneath his ribs. The furnace organ slept, but not peacefully. It waited like a caged reactor. The field dropped. Kale stepped forward. His feet struck black iron. Around him, thousands woke. No one screamed. No one begged. No one asked where his childhood had gone, or why the air tasted of machine oil, or why the last thing he remembered was pain, and the first thing he saw was a vault filled with giants. They emerged from stasis in rows, tall, scarred, pale, eyes adjusting in predatory unison. Some bore the facial structure of different gene lines, but all bore the same silence. Hypno-doctrine rose inside them faster than confusion. A warrior to Kale's left spoke first. Command authority? Another, farther down the rank. Enemy disposition? A third. Armor status? Awaiting issue, Kale answered, before he knew whether he had the right. Operational theater? Unknown. Munition allotment? Unknown. Strategic objective? The vault doors opened with a thunderous inward groan. Historgan IX entered beneath a procession of servo skulls carrying lumen orbs. Behind him came red-robed adepts and armor servitors bearing sealed crates marked with the sigils of Mars and the Aquila. The Magos looked upon the awakened Primaris reserves as a farmer might inspect a harvest, not with affection, but with satisfaction that the crop had not failed. Kale stepped forward, joined by others whose instincts placed them into command clusters before rank markings had been assigned. Magos, Kale said. His voice was deeper than he remembered. It sounded made for Vox Grill and battlefield command. State operational necessity. Historgan IX regarded him through rotating lenses. Subject Kale Vortigern, viable exemplar, cognitive retention confirmed. State operational necessity, Kale repeated. A few of the awakened turned their eyes toward the Magos. There was no impatience in them, only readiness. Historgan IX's metal fingers clicked once against his staff. The Imperium you were built to preserve is no longer whole. The words entered the vault and did not echo. They settled over the warriors like dust from a collapsing shrine. Kale processed them. The doctrine engines inside his mind offered chains of response. Request clarification. Establish command structure. Assess threat. Secure war gear. Await deployment. He chose the first. Clarify. The fortress world Cadia has fallen. The Eye of Terror has ruptured its ancient bounds. A warp scar of galactic proportion divides the Emperor's realm. The Astronomicon is obscured or absent across vast regions. Communication failure is systemic. Loyal worlds are isolated. Chaos infection is general. Xenos predation increases. Imperial force distribution is insufficient. Strategic collapse is ongoing. Another Primaris spoke from the second rank. Lord Guilliman, not yet present to issue direct command. Then who commands? Historgan IX paused. From above, through Vox speakers and cathedral metal, came Belisarius Cawl's voice. I do. No Primaris objected. That would come later, perhaps, when experience complicated obedience. In that moment, they had been made for war, and war had arrived. Arm yourselves, Cawl commanded. The long gestation has ended. You were conceived by order, hidden by necessity, refined by death, and preserved for the hour when the Imperium's old strength proved insufficient. That hour has come. Armor crates opened, servitors advanced, the vault filled with the hiss of seals, the clank of ceramite, the murmur of machine rights. Kale stood still as black carapace ports accepted connection, as warplate was fitted to his enlarged frame, as gauntlets sealed around hands made for weapons he had only dreamed of firing. A helm was presented to him. Its eye lenses stared back like judgment. He took it. Far above, in the strategium, Cawl watched the great rift burn across star charts. It split the hololithic galaxy like a blade wound. A crimson and violet storm stretched from nightmare into reality. Around it, imperial markers flickered out. Worlds vanished. Fleets were lost. Requests for aid multiplied beyond answer. The galaxy, after millennia of lies, had finally revealed the shape of its hunger. Cawl's mechadendrites moved in slow benediction. "At last," he said, "the equation has become honest." Terror did not welcome Robut Guilliman with triumph. It received him as a dying world receives rain, with mouths open, hands raised, bodies crushed beneath the weight of their own need. The throne world had become a shrine so vast that no map could contain its madness. Pilgrims had crossed sectors in ships that stank of urine, incense, old blood and starvation, enduring warp storms, press gangs, tithes and plague holds for the promise of dying beneath the same poisoned sky as the master of mankind. They had come to crawl upon the dust of terror, to kiss stones their ancestors had been told were holy, to see walls they would never approach, to breathe air that had passed over the imperial palace, and call that breath salvation. When word spread that a Primarch had returned, the pilgrim seas broke their banks. They flooded the processional avenues in numbers that made command estimates meaningless. They climbed over barricades, over statues, over each other. Arbite's shock lines failed beneath the mass. Ecclesiarchal preachers screamed until their throats tore, calling the returned sun a miracle, a weapon, a judgment, a sign of the end times and the Emperor's mercy. Men fell and vanished beneath bare feet, iron boots and dragging robes. Bones snapped unheard beneath hymns. The dead remained upright for moments, pinned in place by the crowd's pressure, their faces blue, their eyes bulging toward the distant towers of the palace. Above them, gunships hovered like black carrion. Servo skulls streaked through the smoke, broadcasting litanies and warnings no one heard. Titans stood in the far distance, motionless beneath banners large enough to shroud hab blocks, their god-machine minds watching the madness of flesh with unknowable disdain. The High Lords trembled behind sealed doors. They did not tremble as common men did. Their fear wore jewels, office, authority and robes, heavy with the legal weight of worlds. They spoke through proxies. They demanded clarification. They calculated survival in whispers. They had ruled an empire by inertia, decree and murder, each believing himself necessary because the Imperium had continued dying without quite collapsing under his watch. Now the son of the Emperor walked terror again, and every old arrangement felt suddenly mortal. The custodians did not tremble. They stood in Auramite silence along the avenues of the Imperial Palace, guardian spears grounded, red plumes still in the polluted wind. Their helms did not turn as Guilliman passed. Their stillness was not indifference. It was judgment held in perfect discipline. They had watched over the Emperor's agony for 10,000 years. They had seen saints, tyrants, generals and fools come before the throne and believe themselves important. A Primarch was not a fool. That made him more dangerous, not less. Guilliman walked through the Eternity Gate's approaches, with the weight of the galaxy dragging at him. Imperial commanders knelt as he passed. Some wept openly, unable to master themselves before a being out of myth. Fleet admirals bowed with their foreheads to the floor. Lord generals who had ordered millions into death found their voices reduced to broken prayers. Adepts collapsed under the burden of witnessing history move in living flesh. Priests shrieked benedictions until custodian wardens forced them back with the hafts of their spears. Guilliman hated it. He hated the worship most of all. He had built, bled and ruled in the name of reason, order and survival. He had known the Emperor as father, sovereign, architect and liar. Never as the carrion god these masses adored with such desperate ignorance. Everywhere he looked, he saw devotion feeding on comprehension. Statues of his brothers stood in alcoves like saints. Incense hid the smell of overcrowding, sewage, and fear. Parchment prayers covered machinery, whose functions no attendant understood. Men died in queues to touch reliquaries containing dust, bone fragments, forged certificates, and lies repeated until they became administratively sacred. The Imperium had survived. It had become a nightmare wearing his father's face. Bureaucracy without mercy, faith without understanding, war without end. Every corridor of the palace breathed age and blood. Every scribe bent beneath records of tithes, purges, musters, executions, crusades, and losses. Every command chamber showed a galaxy aflame. There were not enough fleets, not enough warriors, not enough time, never enough time. The Great Rift had torn reality open, and half the Empire screamed beyond reliable reach. Worlds vanished behind warp storms. Chapters bled themselves white. Forge worlds begged for aid, while withholding aid from others by sacred regulation. The Astra Militarum died in numbers too vast for grief to retain shape. Guilliman had returned to an empire that had mistaken endurance for victory. Belisarius Cawl waited beneath armed guard in a vault complex deep within the palace's sanctioned war levels, where Mechanicus rights had been permitted only under watch and threat. Custodians stood at every entrance. Sisters of Silence watched with blank, terrible calm, their presence deadening the air. Firstborn Space Marine officers had gathered in restrained suspicion, their armor bearing the marks of ancient wars, their chapter badges bright beneath candle glow and lumen strips. Tech priests hovered in clusters like carrion insects around sealed armor cradles and stasis sarcophagi. Servo skulls drifted, their lenses clicking. At the chamber's center stood ranks of giants. They wore Mark X power armor, fresh from the forges, broad and angular, each suit a marriage of sacred tradition and new brutality. Bolt rifles rested mag-locked against breastplates. Helm lenses burned red, green, blue, and cold white, depending on forge pattern and gene line. They did not shift. They did not whisper. They stood in companies, then battalions, then ranks vanishing into the dim vault beyond, silent as execution statues awaiting the word to walk. Guilliman entered and stopped. For several heartbeats, no one spoke. Cawl loomed beside the first rank, robes pooling around his mechanical limbs, mechadendrites curling and uncurling with predatory satisfaction. His many lenses watched the Primarch watch the warriors. If he felt fear, no visible system admitted it. "My Lord Primarch," Cawl said, his voice a layered engine hymn, "compliance with your ancient directive has reached deployable maturity." Guilliman did not look at him at first. His eyes moved across the warriors, taller than the old breed, heavier, refined. He saw the Emperor's design in them, yes, but altered through patient arrogance. He saw his own command from an age that felt dead, carried across 10,000 years by a mind too stubborn or too dangerous to let history erase it. Awe touched him despite himself. The achievement was undeniable. The scale alone bordered on the impossible. Thousands of enhanced Astartes, not as crude mutants, not as unstable aberrations, but as disciplined weapons held in reserve for the hour of collapse. Then came disgust, not at them, at the need for them. Mankind had required this. His father's empire, his brother's graves, his own centuries of effort, all had led to a moment where even the angels of death were no longer enough. What sort of age demanded improvement upon the Emperor's executioners? What sort of galaxy made such blasphemy feel prudent? Anger followed, cold, focused, useless. Then acceptance, the oldest poison of command. "Show me one," Guilliman said. Cowl's limbs twitched in approval. "Brother Kale Vortigern." One warrior stepped from the front rank. He moved with the controlled weight of a siege gate closing. His armor was unadorned compared with the veterans in the chamber. its heraldry limited, its honors unwritten. Yet there was nothing raw in the way he carried himself. His helm disengaged with a hiss and came free in his left hand. Kale Vortigern's face was pale, hard, scarred by surgical lines so faint they seemed like old vows carved into flesh. His eyes lifted to Guilliman. He had never seen the Primarch. Memory gave him nothing. No childhood statue, no battlefield sermon, no ancient banner glimpsed through smoke. He had been made in vaults and dreams, taught by machines, fed doctrine until his soul had taken its shape. Yet when he looked upon Robut Guilliman, recognition struck him deeper than thought. His gene wrought being new, his blood new. The organs inside him, the sacred architecture of war and obedience, answered as if a command sigil had ignited in every cell. Kale knelt. The sound of his armored knee striking the deck echoed through the vault. Behind him, thousands knelt as one. "My lord," Kale said. 2 words, no tremor, no ornament, a warrior acknowledging command. Some of the firstborn officers exchanged glances. Others remained expressionless. Suspicion moved among them like a blade beneath cloth. Captain Severian Corda of the Imperial Fists stood near a pillar carved with the names of dead crusades. His yellow armor was scarred down to ceramite grey in places, one pauldron replaced by an older mark bearing a black fist and a fragment of siege script. His face had the blunt severity of a fortress wall. He had lost one eye and kept the ruined socket sealed with a black augmetic lens. When he spoke, he did so quietly, but the chamber heard him. No machine priest can improve upon the Emperor's own angels. Cowl's lenses turned toward him with insect patience. Several mechadendrites rose. Guilliman spoke before the Archmagos could. "The Emperor made warriors for conquest. I require warriors for extinction." The words settled like ash. Corda's jaw tightened. He bowed, because a Primarch had corrected him, and because discipline was stronger than pride. But the doubt remained. Guilliman saw it. He did not resent it. Warriors who did not question strange weapons rarely survived long enough to become veterans. The alarms began as a distant chime. Then the palace screamed. Vox channels erupted across the chamber, layered with Binharic shrieks, mortal panic and command authority. The lumen strips bled from white to emergency red. A tremor passed through the floor, not the impact of artillery, but something deeper, a convulsion in reality itself. The Sisters of Silence turned as one. Custodian spears lifted, firstborn helms sealed. Cawl's mechadendrites stabbed into data ports, ripping information from the palace systems. A voice thundered through the Vox. "Demonic manifestation. Lion's Gate approaches. Cornate entities confirmed. Palace defense protocols active. All Imperial forces to war stations. Repeat, all Imperial forces to war stations." For one instant, the vault held perfect stillness. Then Guilliman drew his blade. The Emperor's sword ignited, its flame casting gold across the faces of the kneeling Primaris. "Rise," he said. They rose. Kale sealed his helm. The world became targeting runes, atmospheric readings, armor integrity, ammunition status, and threat glyphs. Fear did not rise. Doctrine did. Around him, Mark 10 armor came alive in a growl of fiber bundles and awakened machine spirits. Bolt rifles locked into fists. Plasma incinerators whined through charge cycles. Sergeants barked squad identifiers. Cowl's adepts scrambled aside as thousands of warriors moved for war, with the brutal serenity of a guillotine descending. The Lion's Gate approaches had become hell with walls. The outer causeways before the Imperial Palace boiled with bodies. Pilgrims who had come seeking miracles found themselves trampled beneath the boots of defenders and the hooves of demons. The sky had turned the color of arterial blood. Warp lightning crawled across void shields. Brass icons manifested in the air and shattered under anti-demon wards. From rents in reality came the hosts of Khorne, roaring, snarling, laughing through axes and fangs, their flesh red as opened muscle, their eyes burning with murder older than mankind. Astra Militarum gun lines fired until their barrels glowed. Heavy bolters hammered. Lascannons split the air with white fury. Tanks reversed over the dead, treads grinding pilgrims, soldiers and demonic limbs alike into a red paste that steamed on the sacred stone. Commissars screamed orders and shot men who broke. Priests raised chainswords and were torn in half by things that wore skulls as crowns. Custodians struck like golden judgment, each movement perfect, each kill absolute, yet even they were few against the tide. Then the Primaris entered the war. Kale's squad advanced through a curtain of blood mist and promethium smoke, bolt rifles raised. His first shot took a demon in the mouth. The mass-reactive round detonated inside its skull and blew the upper half of its head backward in a burst of horn, black teeth, and burning ichor. His second and third shots walked across another creature's chest, blasting wet craters through muscle that was not flesh and armor that was not metal. It fell clawing at its own wounds, roaring hatred, until an intercessor beside Kale put a round through its eye. "Line advance," Kale voxed. "Measured fire. Prioritize mass breaches." "Acknowledged," came the answer from 6 throats. Plasma incinerators fired from the right flank. Suns in rifle form. Beams of caged star heat struck brass-armored juggernauts and turned plates to molten streams. Riders vanished in blue-white flashes, their axes spinning away with hands still gripping them. Hellblasters stood amid incoming gore and return fire, cooling vents screaming, armor splashed with demon blood that hissed and tried to crawl. They fired again and again. Anything marked by their target runes became light, then ash, then less than ash. A demon engine smashed through a barricade of burned tanks, its hull shaped like a brass skull, its mouth a furnace filled with chained souls. It crushed a squad of mortal troopers beneath one claw, spraying their bodies outward in ribbons of meat and armor fragments. Men broke around it, some fleeing, some kneeling, some laughing because their minds had snapped cleanly enough to resemble joy. Corda led a knot of firstborn into its path. "Imperial fists," he voxed. "Hold." They held. Missiles struck the demon engine's face. Bolters roared. Chainswords carved at cables of living brass. The engine swung, and a firstborn disappeared beneath its claw, his armor collapsing with a sound like a crushed shrine bell. Corda drove a power fist into the machine's knee joint and was hurled aside for his defiance, smashing through a statue plinth in a storm of stone dust. Kale saw the opening. "Hellblasters. Joint wound. Full discharge." "Risk of overload," one answered. "Accepted." The plasma volley hit the damaged knee and turned it into a white wound. The demon engine staggered. Kale charged with his squad, not because rage commanded it, but because doctrine had narrowed all options to one. They fired as they ran, bolt rounds punching through screaming armor. Kale reached the beast as it fell and drove his combat blade into the exposed cables beneath its head. The blade bit. Blood, oil, and warp fire vomited over his gauntlet. The thing screamed into the vox without using any channel, filling helmets with images of skulls piled beneath a red sky. Kale ignored it. He twisted the blade and fired his bolt rifle one-handed into the wound until the magazine ran. Dry. The demon engine died thrashing, crushing its own followers beneath it. Its death burst painted the causeway in black fire and wet fragments of impossible anatomy. The battle became a gutter. Human remains clogged drainage channels designed for rain that rarely fell. Ichor ran in streams over sacred stone. Brain matter slid from cracked helms. Limbs, banners, shattered weapons, and chunks of demon flesh piled against barricades. The air stank of burned hair, plasma discharge, cordite, incense, and the copper reek of opened bodies. The palace guns roared above it all, vast and pitiless. Guilliman fought at the center. Where he walked, demons died. The Emperor's sword cut through warp flesh and left wounds that did not heal, not even in the hateful logic of the immaterium. Custodians formed around him like Auramite thunder. Firstborn rallied to his presence. Mortal soldiers, who had been seconds from collapse, stood again, because a son of the Emperor was killing beside them. The Primaris lines advanced in disciplined fire patterns, locking sectors, sealing breaches, reinforcing weak points, before collapse became rout. Kale saw mortals dissolve under pressure. He did not despise them. They were men facing nightmares with flashlights, faith, and orders. Their courage was a small thing in the scale of the battlefield, and therefore immense. But where they broke, Primaris did not. Where guardsmen died by the 100 to hold 10 paces, Primaris moved into those 10 paces and made them a wall. Hours passed in fire, or minutes. Time lost distinction beneath the roar. At last, the tide faltered. Not ended. Such things never ended cleanly. But the demonic pressure broke against the palace defense like surf against black rock. The rifts shrank beneath warding fire, null presence and sanctified bombardment. The last bloodletter to reach Kale came crawling, despite having no legs, dragging itself through a slurry of corpses, axe clenched in one claw. Kale put his boot upon its spine and fired downward. Its skull burst across the stone. Silence did not return. Only a lesser noise replaced the greater. The wounded screamed. Engines burned. Priests sobbed hymns. Medici servitors dragged bodies into piles, according to whether they could be repaired, harvested, or burned. Guilliman stood amid the ruin of the Lion's Gate approaches, his armor marked with blood that was human, demonic, and transhuman. Before him, Primaris squads reformed their lines. Their casualties were real. Their armor was scarred. Some were dead. Some stood with wounds that would have killed mortal heroes 10 times over. But the line held. Cawl approached through the carnage, mechadendrites stepping over corpses, lenses bright with triumph he did not bother to hide. Guilliman looked upon the new warriors, then beyond them to the mountains of dead. He understood then. Cawl had not made replacements for the old angels. He had not erased the firstborn, nor undone the Emperor's work, nor solved the eternal arithmetic of war. He had made something colder and more valuable. He had made time. A few more hours at the gate, a few more worlds held, a few more crusades launched before darkness swallowed the map. In the 41st millennium, that was not hope. Hope was too gentle a word. It was ammunition. Guilliman turned his gaze upon the burning horizon. "Reform the line," he ordered. "The next assault will not wait for our grief." Kale Vortigern heard him over the vox, over the crackle of flames, over the dying and the dead. "As commanded, my lord," he said, and raised his bolt rifle toward the red sky. The void above Terra became a harbor for extinction. Warships gathered until the stars vanished behind armor plate, reactor glare, and the slow procession of gunmetal cathedrals. From Mars came forge vessels broad as cities, their flanks blackened by furnace smoke, their holds pregnant with ammunition, armor, macro shell casings, replacement limbs, sanctified oils, and the red-robed priesthoods required to keep holy machinery from remembering that it was old enough to hate. From Jupiter came dock fleets and void yards dragged from orbit by tugs the size of lesser cruisers, surrounded by swarms of labor craft, servitor barges, and coffin transports. From Armageddon came troop carriers stinking of promethium, ash, and tank oil, their holds filled with steel legion regiments who had learned to sleep in rebreathers and wake to artillery. From every war world still able to answer, ships came bearing men, guns, tanks, prayers, and the expectation of death. Moons vanished beneath the shadow of the muster. The Indomitus crusade did not assemble like an army. It accreted like an iron continent. Battleships hung in layered defensive rings. Strike cruisers moved between them like hunting beasts. Mechanicus arc ships glowed with furnace light, their hulls embossed with cog, skull, and scripture. Transports clustered in numbers that made the mind recoil. Each carried battalions, regiments, maniples, cohorts, penitent levies, abhuman auxiliaries, medici units, ammunition trains, corpse renderers, preacher choirs and clerks, to record every soul expended in the Emperor's name. Millions of mortal soldiers waited in steel bellies. Billions more would be drawn into the crusade before its first fires guttered. Trillions trembled in the dark beyond terror, unaware whether salvation or annihilation would reach them first. At the center of it all stood Robert Guilliman, and even he looked small before the scale of mankind's desperation. He watched the hololithic galaxy burn in a stratagem aboard the Macragge's honor. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost above banners and drifting incense clouds, its floors inlaid with star maps and campaign grids. Officers from 100 commands stood at attention around him. Adeptus administratum savants whispered casualty projections through lipless mouths. Navy lords argued in clipped murmurs over fuel, translation windows and escort ratios. Mechanicus adepts fed data into the table with metal fingers. Servo skulls passed through the air bearing parchment, oath seals and ration decrees. Guilliman did not need them to tell him the truth. The truth was read across the map. Worlds had gone silent. Sectors had become blind. Crusade routes were choked by warp storm and traitor fleet activity. The Great Rift divided the Emperor's realm like a blade left in a wound. Every projection ended in too much loss. Billions dead already. Trillions threatened. Chapter strength collapsing in dozens of theaters. Astra Militarum reserves insufficient by margins that made mockery of arithmetic. Forge world production sabotaged, delayed, isolated, or consumed. The Imperium had always been a machine that ate human lives to continue moving. Now the machine was choking on bones and still demanded more. Beside the hololith, Belisarius Cawl loomed in crimson shadow. "Your emotional response is suboptimal," the Archmagos said. Guilliman did not look at him. "You mistake grief for inefficiency." "I mistake nothing. I identify grief as a predictable byproduct of excessive biological investment in unsustainable strategic conditions." Several officers stiffened. None spoke. Guilliman's eyes remained on the burning map. "A billion dead is not a byproduct, Archmagos." "No, it is a datum. A tragic datum if you insist upon the poetic classification, but a datum still. It becomes useful only when it alters action." Now Guilliman turned. The Primarch's gaze fell upon Cawl with the weight of a closing fortress gate. "Take care." Cawl bowed with many limbs. "I am taking care, my lord. That is the source of my offensiveness." The newly awakened Primaris had been mustered in holds and armory decks across the Crusade fleet, organized first, not by chapter, but by gene line and battlefield role, then broken deliberately into mixed formations. Guilliman named them the Unnumbered Sons, though every warrior among them bore designations, genetic records, armor marks, and future assignments waiting in sealed data vaults. They were legion-sized in mass, but not a legion. That distinction mattered more than pride, more than ease, more than the nostalgia of broken ages. The legions had conquered the galaxy and nearly murdered it. The Unnumbered Sons would fight together only long enough to save what could be saved, then be scattered into chapters, crusade forces, and dying brotherhoods that needed blood strong enough to endure the new age. Kale Vortigern stood among them, in a hangar wide enough to house a city district. The deck beneath his boots trembled with the movement of armored columns and loader servitors. Thunderhawk gunships hung from mag cranes. Repulsor grav tanks rested in maintenance bays, while tech marines and red-robed adepts argued in ritual cant over access permissions and machine spirit. Temper. Intercessor squads drilled in firing blocks. Hellblasters stood before plasma calibration shrines, while their weapons drank power through thick black cables. Aggressors tested their armor's brutal weight in slow, grinding steps. Inceptors checked jump assemblies beneath the watch of adepts, who blessed every nozzle and stabilizer with smoking oil. Kale's assigned squad was a study in imperial contradiction. Brother Marius Thane bore the gene line of Dawn, and even newly made he seemed carved rather than grown. He spoke rarely, and braced himself, as if every flaw might become a wall that needed holding. Brother Corvin Ral, of Corax's blood, moved with a silence that unsettled even transhumans. He watched doorways, gantries, and shadowed maintenance alcoves, with the patience of a blade awaiting an unguarded throat. Brother Sarkhan Vel carried the inheritance of Vulcan, and his restraint showed in the way his hands lingered over weapon locks and safety rights, as though every bolt shell had weight beyond metal. Brother Arven Castivar, son of Sanguinius by gene and burden, stood too still, his beauty ruined by the hunger in his eyes whenever live fire sounded across the hangar. Kale commanded them because command had been assigned, and because they accepted assignment with the cold discipline of warriors who had never known any life but preparation. Captain Severian Corda came to them as liaison, judge, and irritant. The Imperial Fist wore ancient yellow plate scarred by wars the Primaris had only studied in hypnodreams. His armor bore repairs upon repairs, campaign marks scraped by enemy fire, purity seals browned by smoke and age. He carried a helm beneath one arm, and contempt in the set of his jaw. His remaining natural eye studied the squad. The augmetic in the other socket clicked softly as it measured them. "You are tall," Corda said. "Well-armed, well-made, untested. That is not the same as being Astartes." The hangar noise rolled around them. Engines, chains, vox orders, distant chanting. The newborn army preparing to enter a galaxy that had been killing its predecessors for 10,000 years. Kale looked down at the firstborn captain, not with arrogance, not with challenge, simply because Cawl had made him taller, and because reality did not bend for courtesy. "Then test us," Kale said. Corda's mouth tightened. So he did. He tested them in boarding simulations where gravity failed without warning, and false bulkheads became breach points. He tested them in kill houses filled with servitor targets that used traitor Astartes combat patterns drawn from 10,000 years of massacre reports. He tested them in vacuum marches across the outer hull of a cruiser, where a mistake would leave even a transhuman warrior drifting into the dark until recovered or forgotten. He tested them with ammunition deprivation, vox corruption, false orders, ambushes, civilian obstruction protocols, demonic manifestation drills, and siege endurance exercises that lasted until mortal observers collapsed from exhaustion merely watching the feeds. The Primaris moved like perfect doctrine. Their firing lines formed with mathematical speed. Their fields of fire overlapped cleanly. Their reloading cycles were economical, their target priorities correct, their squad spacing ideal according to codex patterning. Kale's commands were brief. Marius held assigned ground until ordered otherwise, even when impact shells hammered his plate hard enough to drive him backward by inches. Corvin vanished from visual tracking in smoke and darkness, reappearing behind enemy markers with a combat blade already moving. Sarkhan withheld fire when servitor targets were marked as civilians, then eliminated hostile threats with precise bursts that did not waste a round. Arven struck fastest, too fast sometimes, his aggression perfect, until it nearly outran the formation. Corda watched, and then he walked among them like a veteran walking through a parade ground. "Too clean," he said after a boarding drill. Kale removed his helm. Steam rose from the collar seal. "Elaborate. Your breach pattern assumed the enemy wanted the corridor. The objective marker was the corridor. The enemy wanted your assumption." Corda pointed to a scar on his pauldron. "Iron warriors did that to me at Kaldrak's gate. They gave us the wall. We took it. Then they collapsed the city beneath it and shelled the crater for 3 days. Doctrine told us where victory was. Experience told us too late that the enemy had moved it." Brother Marius inclined his head. "Then doctrine must be adjusted." Corda gave the faintest, harshest smile. "Now you begin to sound less like a machine priest's sermon." In the next simulation, Corda led firstborn veterans against the squad. They did not move as cleanly. They wasted motion. They broke formation. They ignored ideal positioning when instinct told them a firing slit was too obvious or a corpse pile too conveniently placed. They used damaged doors as shields, feigned ammunition failures, triggered traps early to shape movement, and flooded vox channels with scraps of old battle cant that had no place in the clean logic of the exercise. They fought like warriors who had been betrayed by maps, ammunition counts, commanders, allies, machine spirits and fortune, and had survived by hating surprise more than death. Kale's squad lost, not by much, but enough. Arvin struck a wall hard enough to dent it when the simulation ended. Again, Corda looked at him. Anger is not a tactic. No, Arvin said, voice low. It is fuel. Fuel burns out. Kale raised a hand before the Blood Angel's gene son could answer. Again, he said, with modification. Corda studied him. There, perhaps, something shifted. Not trust, not yet. Trust was a fortress, and Corda was of Dawn's line. But the first stone had been set. Guilliman summoned them after the third cycle of trials. They stood in the strategium beneath the burning map, Primaris and Firstborn together, while Cawl's many limbs clicked softly beside a bank of projection engines. Casualty estimates moved through the hololith, like wounds opening in light. System names appeared, flared, vanished. Each vanishing marked a world whose pleas had ceased. Guilliman let the silence last long enough for every warrior present to understand that pride had no scale beside this. Look well, the Primarch said. No one moved. This is the war before us, not a campaign, not a crusade in the old sense, whatever title we give it to make men march with straighter backs. This is triage performed upon a dying empire, while the knife is still in the wound. Billions are already dead. Trillions stand within the shadow of extinction. Every hour spent arguing over precedence, purity, tradition, or honor is an hour purchased with lives we cannot repay. Cawl's lenses gleamed. Precisely. Tradition has become a corpse chain around mankind's throat. It drags the species backward toward ritualized failure. I have supplied a cutting implement. Corda turned on him. You speak of tradition because you do not understand honor. You are a blasphemer, dressed in red iron. Several primaries shifted, not in alarm, but in readiness. Cawl's mechadendrites lifted like serpents. Blasphemy, Cawl said, is often a term applied by the obsolete to the functional. Corda took a step forward. Say that again without your machines between us. Enough, Guilliman said. The word struck the chamber harder than a gunshot. Corda stopped. Cawl stilled. Even the servo skulls seemed to hesitate in the air. Guilliman looked from the firstborn captain to the Archmagos. You will both serve. You will both restrain your contempt until it becomes useful. Captain Corda, these warriors are not your enemy. Archmagos, the dead traditions you mock are the bones upon which mankind still stands. Break too many, and your improved warriors will inherit only dust. Cawl bowed. Corda bowed. Neither looked pleased. A vox chime sounded through the chamber. An officer in midnight blue naval dress stepped forward and knelt, offering a data slate with both hands. My Lord Primarch, urgent astropathic fragments from the Karan Nexus. Traitor fleet elements confirmed. Warp translation routes destabilizing. Enemy forces appear to be attempting severance of near-Terra reinforcement corridors. The hololith shifted. A system near enough to Terra to matter flared crimson. Around it, warp currents snarled in ugly loops. If the Karan Nexus fell, several crusade routes would collapse before they opened. Terra would not be besieged in the old manner, by walls and trenches. It would be isolated, strangled, made blind, while the rest of the Imperium died unheard. Guilliman read the slate. His expression became colder with every line. Heretic Astartes? Corda asked. Yes, Guilliman said, and worse. Kale felt the squad around him absorb the words. No fear. Armory status, route, enemy composition, mission parameters. Their minds moved to war, because war had called. Guilliman looked at the assembled commanders. The first spear thrust of the Indomitus crusade will be at Karan. We break the traitor hold before it closes. Fleet elements translate within the hour. Unnumbered sons will deploy as primary assault formations alongside firstborn veterans, Astra Militarum boarding regiments, Skitari maniples and navy armsmen. We will not permit the throne world to be chained in the dark. Corda sealed his helm. Imperial fists, stand ready. Kale did the same. His helm locked into place with a hiss. The strategium became data overlays and command runes. Unnumbered sons, stand ready, he said. Across the fleet, the order spread. Warriors entered drop bays. Mortal soldiers crossed themselves, kissed icons, checked charge packs, vomited quietly, then stood when sergeants shouted them into lines. Priests moved through troop decks, anointing foreheads with oil and ash. Tech priests blessed plasma coils and engine cores. Servitors loaded torpedoes with mechanical indifference. In the cavernous launch holds, Primaris squads stood in silence, while thunderhawks growled awake around them. Firstborn veterans checked weapons with the intimacy of old executioners. The Void Armada began to move. One by one, then by hundreds, then by thousands, ships turned their prows from terror toward the storm. Plasma drives burned like captive suns. Formation lights vanished beneath overlapping void shields. Navigators were sealed in their towers. Astropaths were chained into their choirs. Geller field generators awoke across the fleet, their machine spirits wailing beneath layers of prayer, mathematics, and fear. Kale stood mag-locked in the assault bay of a strike cruiser, Corda beside him, his squad arrayed in silence. Through the deck, through the armor, through the marrow of the ship, he felt the translation countdown. Corda spoke over a private Vox channel. Still wish to be tested? Kale looked ahead at the sealed launch doors, beyond which waited the warp, the enemy, and the first true measure of what Cawl had made. Yes. Corda gave a low grunt. It might have been approval. It might have been warning. Reality tore. The Crusade fleet translated into the warp, and every Geller field screamed as the newborn army entered hell. The Crusade fleet tore itself out of the warp into a system already in its death throes. Reality snapped back around the ships with the violence of a closing jaw. Geller fields dimmed from screaming radiance to wounded hums. Void shields flared as debris struck them in bright, brief blossoms of force. The Karan Nexus lay ahead, a knot of translation routes and astropathic relay stations that should have been guarded by Imperial steel, orbital bastions, and the disciplined fury of the Navy. Instead, it burned beneath a sky stained by warp storm and treachery. Kale Vortigern saw the system through tactical feed and auger ghosting as his strike cruiser translated into real space. The oculus screens showed a graveyard pretending to be a battlefield. Orbital stations hung open to the void, their armor peeled back, docking spines snapped, defense batteries silent, or firing madly at targets that existed only in corrupted machine spirits. One bastion rotated slowly above the planet with its interior exposed, entire habitation rings gutted by boarding action. Bodies drifted from the breach in glimmering clouds, crewmen, armsmen, adepts and servitors, frozen together in the last gestures of panic, prayer, and obedience. Beyond the stations, Imperial Navy wrecks rolled in the dark. A Luna-class cruiser had been cut nearly in half, its spine broken, its cathedral towers sheared away. Through magnified feed, Kale saw the command deck exposed to vacuum. The officers were still at their posts. Their bodies had frozen in prayer poses, knees bent beneath restraint harnesses, hands locked around icons, mouths open in final hymns that the void had stolen before sound could form. Another ship burned without atmosphere, plasma venting from its engines in blue-white lashes. Its vox was still transmitting. The words came through distortion, repeated by a dead man's automated prayer loop. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. Then the signal broke into laughter that was not human. The planet below was worse. Karan Primus had been an imperial world of relay towers, fortress cities, and void anchor monasteries. Now its night side glowed with fire lines visible from orbit. Hive districts burned beneath demonic storms. Spires cracked and leaned like broken spears. Lightning of impossible colors crawled across the cloud cover, striking manufactoria, temples, and troop mustering fields. Hab blocks rose from the surface in clusters, lifted by warp pressure as if the planet itself had forgotten gravity. Some hung in the air intact for moments, windows full of screaming silhouettes, before bursting apart and raining masonry, furniture, bodies, and blood over the streets below. Corda stood beside Kale in the assault bay, watching the same feed through his helm lenses. "Throne," the firstborn captain said. It was not fear. Kale understood that. It was recognition. Corda had seen worlds die before. The curse in his voice was not surprise, but weariness sharpened into contempt. The fleet vox became Guilliman's voice. All formations attend. Enemy disposition confirmed. Traitor fleet elements in high anchor. Heretic Astartes presence on the surface. Cult armies in all major population centers. Demon engine activity in the Western Continental Theater. The planetary astropathic crown remains partially intact, but under assault. If Karan falls, near-terra reinforcement corridors are compromised. If the enemy holds the Nexus, the throne world bleeds in isolation. We will not permit it. The Primarch's voice did not rise. It did not need to. It carried through every command deck, troop hold, launch bay, and armor shrine like law given breath. Lord Varkul the twice-flayed commands the traitor host, Guilliman continued. He has declared this world an offering to the gods and a snare for our crusade. Deny him both. The Astra Militarum will secure beachheads and draw enemy mass. Skitari maniples will silence corrupted macro batteries. Navy wings will contest the upper atmosphere. Adeptus Astartes spearheads will strike command nexuses, ritual sites and warp anchors. No retreat, no delay, no indulgence in hatred beyond its usefulness. Strike clean, strike hard, break the throat before the beast finishes screaming. Across the assault bay, mortal deck crews moved like ants beneath armored giants. Serfs locked ammunition feeds, sealed grav chute harnesses, blessed mag clamps, and backed away with white faces. A priest in smoke-stained robes moved between the Primaris, touching each breastplate with an aquila-shaped reliquary. His lips trembled as he prayed. Kale barely felt the touch through the armor. Brother Marius checked his bolt rifle for the third time. Brother Corvin stood silent in shadow, cast by a thunderhawk wing, invisible to mortal eyes despite standing in plain sight. Brother Sarkhan murmured a low oath to Vulcan and the Emperor, not asking for survival, but for control. Brother Arvan Castivar flexed his gauntleted hands around his weapon, his breathing too slow, too measured, as though he restrained something inside himself by force of ritual. Corda walked the line before them. "You will deploy by grav chute through flak, thermal shear and warp turbulence," he said. "You will land scattered if the currents bite hard enough. Rally by squad rune. Do not trust civilian movement. Cultists wear fear better than uniforms. Do not trust silence. Do not trust architecture. Do not trust the dead until you have put a round through the skull and burned the corpse if time allows." Kale looked at him, acknowledged. Corda's augmetic eye clicked. "You answer quickly. You issue clear instruction." That was not praise. It was accurate. For half a breath, Kale thought the Imperial Fist might laugh. He did not. The launch runes turned green. The assault bay opened to fire. Wind and void chill howled into the compartment. The planet filled the opening below, vast and bleeding, its atmosphere laced with flak bursts, burning aircraft and crawling stormlight. Dropcraft and grav chute formations poured from the crusade fleet in descending spears. Around them, the void battle had already begun. Lance beams cut across orbit. Macro shells moved like wrath-given mass. traitor vessels answered from the dark side of the planet, their hulls marked by spikes, chains, and profane sigils, their gun decks vomiting fire. Kale stepped from the bay. For several seconds, he fell through war. His armor sealed against atmospheric burn. Runes flickered across his vision. The grav chute engaged in controlled pulses, slowing him only enough to keep impact survivable. Flak burst around him in black flowers. A transport to his left took a direct hit and came apart, spilling guardsmen into the sky in burning clusters. Some screamed across open vox channels until the fall or the flames ended them. A cult aircraft, its wings painted with flayed skin banners, spiraled past trailing smoke and severed limbs from its crew compartment. It rammed a descending Valkyrie, and both machines exploded in a blossom of fuel, metal, and men. Below, a hab block lifted into the air. It rose sideways from a burning district, foundations ripping free, streets tearing upward with it. Thousands of civilians clung to windows, gantries, and collapsed transit rails. Kale heard them through atmospheric pickups, a mass shriek distorted by wind and warp pressure. The structure rotated slowly, shedding bodies in streams. Then some unseen force crushed it inward. The block folded like wet parchment, vomiting dust, masonry, and human remains into the drop path. "Correct descent," Kale voxed. His squad adjusted. Corvin vanished into the debris cloud. Marius dropped through it like a shell. Arvin fired mid-descent, at a demon shape leaping between rising stones, each bolt detonation tearing chunks of red flesh from the thing before it fell away. They struck the ground in a plaza that had once served as a civic muster square. Now it was a cratered bowl of broken statues, dead militia, and burning banners. Kale landed hard enough to crack the stone beneath his boots. His rifle came up before the grav chute harness had finished disengaging. Marius landed to his right, Sarkhan to his left. Arvin hit near an overturned troop carrier and immediately opened fire. Corvin appeared on the roof of a shattered administratum kiosk, already killing. The enemy came laughing. Cultists poured from the avenues in ragged waves, wearing scraps of imperial uniform, defaced with blood and brass. Some carried autoguns. Others carried knives, chain blades, mining charges, or severed heads. Many had carved symbols into their own flesh. They screamed Varkal's name and the names of darker masters. Behind them came corrupted armor, Lehman Russ hulls daubed with runes, turrets replaced with demon mouths, tracks grinding over the bodies of those too slow to clear their path. And behind them, larger shapes moved through the smoke. Demon engines. Kale marked targets. Kill Corridor, East Avenue, Intercessor's Anchor. His squad and the adjoining Primaris line moved without hesitation. Intercessors formed a wall of disciplined fire at the plaza mouth, bolt rifles cracking in measured rhythm. The first cultist wave disintegrated. Mass reactive rounds struck bodies and burst them apart from within. Chests opened. Skulls vanished in red mist. Arms spun away, still gripping weapons. Those behind slipped on the pulped remains and were cut down before they could rise. Marius stood in the center of the line, taking return fire across his pauldron and helm without yielding a step. "Hold," he voxed. The word could have been carved from stone. To the south, Hellblasters advanced into view, their plasma incinerators glowing like caged suns. A demon engine clambered over a barricade, its body a fusion of battle tank, brass ribcage, and screaming faces stretched across armor plates. It vomited green fire into a column of guardsmen, turning men into blackened silhouettes that collapsed into greasy ash. The Hellblasters fired as one. Plasma struck the thing's chest and bored through. Brass melted, flesh vaporized. The faces welded to its hull shrieked as the machine came apart, its reactor or demon heart rupturing in a white-blue flare that swallowed the barricade and everything near it. Farther ahead, aggressors entered the trench network before the relay crown's outer gate. They did not advance so much as grind forward, heavy armor shrugging off small arms, Boltstorm gauntlets roaring until the trench became a tunnel of explosions. Cultists vanished under the storm. Sandbags burst. Flesh sprayed against corrugated metal. Flamestorm weapons washed bunkers in burning promethium, and the screams inside were brief because the fire was thorough. A traitor heavy weapon team managed one shot before an aggressor's fist punched through the firing slit, seized the gunner by the face, and dragged him forward until his skull collapsed against the bunker wall. Reavers moved where the main line did not. They fell upon cult command cells in the upper ruins, skull helms emerging from smoke and darkness. Their terror tactics needed no embellishment. They cut Vox officers apart, left commanders hanging from relay masts by their own cables, broadcast the last panicked breaths of traitor priests across enemy channels. In one Hab shrine, Corvin joined them for 6 minutes. When he emerged, the enemy Vox net in that district had gone silent except for a single repeated sound, a heartbeat, slow, amplified, waiting. The Astra Militarum landed in numbers that made the earth shake. Billions would be committed across the planetary war before the campaign ended, but here and now, millions came in waves. Dropships slammed into landing zones under fire. Chimeras rolled from carrier ramps into streets already slick with blood. Infantry advanced behind banners and tank hulls, laser guns firing in disciplined sheets. They died in masses. Mortar fire erased platoons. Demon engines crushed companies. Cult artillery tore holes in formations and filled the air with limbs, packs, helmets, screams, and red rain. Commissars strode through the slaughter, bolt pistols raised, their coats snapping in the heat wash. "Forward!" they shouted. "For the Emperor! Forward!" And the guardsmen went forward. Kale saw them die and understood the Primarch's strategy without needing to admire its cost. Mortal mass drew the enemy's teeth. Primaris blades cut for the nerves. The Karan Nexus lay beneath the astropathic crown, a fortress of blackened marble and vox spires where Varkul's lieutenants coordinated the ritual, choking the system's roots. Kale's spearhead reached its outer court under a sky full of burning aircraft. Corda and a squad of firstborn Imperial fists joined them at the breach, armor scorched, one warrior missing an arm and still carrying a bolt pistol in the other hand. "Late," Kale said. Corda looked at the piles of dead before the gate. "Thorough." The breach charges blew inward. They entered hell under a ceiling of skulls. Heretic Astartes waited within, black and brass armor, chain axes, trophies of skin, horned helms, vox grills laughing. They were not the crude madness of cultists. They were the old wound, the long war in Ceramite. The Emperor's angels turned murderers of their own species. One of them spread his arms as the loyalists entered. "New meat for an old throne," he voxed. "Cawl sends fresh children to die for a corpse," Arvin snarled. Kale raised his rifle. "Fire!" The hall vanished into muzzle flare. Bolters roared. Bolt rifles answered with flatter, harder cracks. Chain axes screamed to life. The traitors came through the fire, taking hits that would have pulped mortals and staggering onward. One heretic Astartes lost half his helm and laughed with exposed teeth before Corda's power fist crushed his chest into his spine. Another drove a chain axe into a Primaris intercessor's shoulder, carving down through armor and meat until Sarkhan put a burst through the traitor's knee and Kale finished him with a shot under the chin. Then the champion came. He was vast even for a traitor Astartes, his armor flayed of paint and covered in strips of skin cured into parchment. Hooks hung from his gorget. His chain axe was two-handed, its teeth made from black metal that bled while spinning. His helm had no eye lenses, only a grill of vertical slits glowing with furnace red. He struck through the melee like a butcher through hanging carcasses. Corda saw him first. "Kale, left." Kale turned, too slow by a fraction. The chain axe hit beneath his right arm and chewed through ceramite, rib plating and flesh. Pain detonated white across his senses. Warning runes flooded his vision. The axe tore free in a spray of blood and armor fragments. Kale dropped to one knee, his bolt rifle clattering against the floor. His right lung collapsed. One heart stuttered. The champion loomed over him. "Prototype," the traitor growled. Corda drove forward, but enemy fire pinned him for the breath it took. Kale's body died by degrees. Then the furnace opened. The Belisarian furnace ignited inside him like a reactor waking in meat. Chemical fire flooded his blood. Clotting agents sealed ruptures with brutal speed. Secondary organs surged. Pain did not vanish. It became irrelevant, transformed from warning into fuel. His hearts hammered together, then harder still. Steam vented from the wound in his armor as blood boiled against overheated tissue. His gauntlet closed around the traitor's wrist before the champion could strike again. Kale stood. Corda saw it. Through smoke, gore, and muzzle flash, the firstborn captain saw a wound that would have crippled an Astartes become a reason for the Primaris to rise angrier, stronger, less alive in any sane sense, and yet still killing. The traitor tried to wrench free. Kale did not permit it. He stepped inside the champion's guard, seized the horned helm with both hands, and drove his thumbs into the metal around the grille. The traitor roared. Kale crushed inward. Ceramite buckled. The helm split. Corrupted bone cracked beneath it. Brain matter and blackened blood squeezed through the grille in thick ropes as Kale's gauntlets closed. The champion's roar became a wet, choking pulse. Kale kept crushing until the skull collapsed completely and the body sagged against him. He threw the corpse aside. "Advance," he voxed, voice flat beneath the furnace burn. Corda stared for less than a second. Then he turned and killed the next traitor in his path. They took the command Nexus room by room. Reavers severed the upper Vox shrines. Hellblasters burned the ritual engines until the stone ran molten. Aggressors held the lower corridors against counterattack, their ammunition counters dropping into warning red as enemy bodies stacked waist-high before them. Intercessors secured the astropathic choir vault, though most of the choir were already dead, their skulls opened by warp pressure, their blood painted across the walls in symbols that made mortal soldiers vomit through their rebreathers. Lord Varkal the Twice-Flayed did not die there. His image appeared in the final chamber, projected through a column of smoke and witchlight. He was armored in red-black plate, his exposed flesh peeled and pinned across his own armor in wet banners, his face hidden behind a mask of stitched skin and iron. Around him, the surviving ritualists burned as the Nexus failed. "Guilliman's new sons bleed," Varkal said. His voice crawled through the Vox like a blade under skin. "Good. Let the corpse emperor make taller corpses. We will build higher altars." Kale raised his rifle, though he knew the image was not flesh. Corda spoke beside him. "Face us, traitor." Varkal laughed. "In time, son of the broken wall. In time, machine-born whelp. Tell Cawl I have smelled his work. Tell him the gods are curious." The projection collapsed. The warp pressure broke. Across Karan Primaris, Imperial forces secured the Nexus at obscene cost. The planetary astropathic crown survived, though 3 of its spires had to be sterilized by orbital lance fire after demonic growths rooted through the choir chambers. Entire hive districts were purged from orbit to deny lingering warp infection. Millions of mortal troops lay dead in the first phase alone, heaped in avenues, trenches, landing fields, and breach corridors. Medici servitors could not process the wounded fast enough. Corpse grinders jammed. Priests ran out of oil for last rites and used blood instead. The planet was saved, only in the sense that its corpse still belonged to the Imperium. Guilliman stood in the ruined strategium of the relay crown, while officers prepared victory declarations. Outside the shattered windows, Karan burned from horizon to horizon. Kale stood nearby, armor patched, wound sealed, but not healed. Corda stood beside him, silent. A Lord General began to speak of triumph. Guilliman turned his head. No anger showed on the Primarch's face. That made the silence worse.
Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support helps.
A victory that costs a world its soul is merely a delay, Guilliman said. Record it accurately. Torchbearer fleets did not travel like emissaries of mercy. They came as armored processions through the wounded dark, bearing sealed gene caskets, Mark X warplate, bolt rifles, plasma incinerators, grav tanks, surgical engines, stasis vaults, mechanicus envoys, Primaris reinforcements, and the authority of Robout Guilliman, written in command cipher and blood-red wax. Their holds were chapels of cold iron and guarded possibility. Their decks rang with the tread of newly made giants marching beneath banners that did not yet belong to them. They crossed routes where the Astronomicon guttered like a candle seen through smoke. They translated through warp tides that gnawed at their Geller fields and whispered names into the teeth of sleeping serfs. They answered the pleas of chapters that had spent centuries dying one brother at a time. Some chapters welcomed them with hymns and suspicion in equal measure. Some received them in silence. Some aimed their guns. The strike cruiser, Honor of Terror, broke from the warp above the dead moon of Othris, bleeding static from its vox arrays and trailing frost from its translation vanes. Around it came escorts, mechanicus carriers, armory barges, and a scarred frigate bearing the yellow fist of Captain Severian Corder's command. The moon below was black glass and cratered stone, orbiting a gas giant the colour of old bruises. Its only living wound was the fortress monastery of the Ashen Wardens, carved into a mountain range of volcanic basalt and iron-rich rock. From orbit, it looked less like a bastion than a tomb that had learned to grow gun batteries. Its void shields flickered weakly. Its orbital defense platforms were dead. 2 of its 3 bastion spires had been reduced to broken stumps. The remaining tower still flew the chapter banner, a grey blade set against a field of ash white, but the cloth was torn and burned through in places. Kale Vortigern studied the augur returns from the Thunderhawk's restraint cradle and saw a fortress that had endured too long by hating the concept of surrender more than death itself. Half strength? Brother Marius asked over the squad vox. Kale reviewed the data slate fixed to his gauntlet. Less. Brother Arvin Castivar's voice came tight and low. Then they should welcome us. Corder stood near the forward ramp, mag locked in place, helm beneath one arm. You still think need and welcome are kin. They are not. The Thunderhawk descended through cloud layers, thick with volcanic dust. Ash scraped across the hull. Lightning flickered over the monastery's defense towers. No honor guard waited upon the landing field. No hymnals sounded. Only gun servitors tracked the descending craft with heavy bolters and lascannons, their skulls ticking as they calculated whether the sons of Guilliman had come as salvation, insult, or invasion. Kale stepped down onto stone carved with the names of the dead. Every slab of the landing field had names cut into it. Some were clean. Most had been worn shallow by centuries of armored boots and funeral processions. Snow of pale ash drifted over the engravings and gathered in the cracks. At the far end of the field waited the surviving Ashen Wardens. They were firstborn, all of them. Their armor was old, patched, blackened by battle, and bordered in bone-white script. Some wore marks so ancient that Kale's armor spirit identified them with reverent uncertainty. Their helms were fashioned with narrow eye lenses, severe and knightly, but the warriors beneath them looked like the last stones in a collapsing wall. They stood in formation because pride demanded it. Their number was pitiful. At their head stood Chapter Master Routh Malgorn. He was not tall for an Astartes, but he had the immovable presence of a fortress door, barred from the inside. His armor was blackened silver, its breastplate cracked and repaired with visible adamantium clamps. A cloak of ash-grey hide hung from his shoulders. His face was bare, skin pale and scarred, beard trimmed short, one cheek branded with the chapter's blade sigil. His eyes went first to Corda, then to Kale, then to the ranks of Primaris descending behind him. The gaze lingered on their height, their new armor, their unscarred heraldry, their weapons. Malgorn's lip curled. "So," he said, "the Primarch sends replacements." Corda walked forward before Kale could answer. "He sends reinforcements. There is a difference only to men who do not hear their dead speaking from every wall." Kale looked beyond the chapter master. The fortress monastery doors stood open behind him, revealing a cathedral corridor lined with sarcophagi. Dreadnoughts slept in armored alcoves, their sarcophagus plates inscribed with names and campaigns. Some were empty, awaiting warriors who would never return. Others housed heroes too damaged for flesh, entombed in iron so they might continue serving beyond the mercy of death. Servo skulls burned incense before them. Chaplains in black armor moved through the hall, crozius heads low, intoning endurance to warriors who had endured almost to extinction. The Ashen Wardens had the smell of a chapter at the edge. Oiled relics, old blood, burned ceramite, recycled air, gene seed vaults running dry. An apothecary stood near the inner threshold, his white armor stained grey by ash. Red vials hung empty from his belt. His narthecium claws had been polished clean, but there was no hiding the wear on the extraction drill. He watched the incoming Primaris not as brothers, but as a man watching a verdict. The debate began in the Hall of Embers. It was not a council chamber. It was a mausoleum with benches. The walls were lined with the helms of the dead, each one facing inward, each eye lens dark. At the far end burned a brazier fed by powdered bone and sacred oils, its smoke drawn upward into a flue carved with litanies of defiance. The chapter's remaining captains stood along one side. Kale, Corda, and the torchbearer escort stood along the other. Between them waited Cowl's envoy. He was called Logis Envoy Thelxor Vey, though most of his body had long since rendered names theatrical. His torso was a narrow cage of brass and bone-white plating, suspended on 6 multi-jointed limbs. His head was a polished metal mask crowded with lenses. Tubes pulsed beneath his robes, feeding nutrient oils to the organic remnants sealed within. His voice emerged flat, precise and almost tender in its absence of warmth. "Chapter Master Malgorn, you are operating beneath sustainable viability. Current battle brother count has declined beyond acceptable recovery threshold. Gene seed reserves are depleted. Scout induction success rate is insufficient. Armory degradation is notable. Dreadnought sarcophagus occupancy exceeds viable support projections. Your chapter faces extinction within 3 major deployments or 1 catastrophic assault." Malgorn stared at him. "We know our dead better than you do, machine thing." "Correction. You know their names. I know the rate at which their absence kills you." A growl moved through the Ashen Wardens. Corda stepped into the center before hands found weapon grips. "Routh, listen." The chapter master's eyes snapped to him. "Do not speak to me as if I am some hive militia colonel clutching a ruined gate. You know what is being asked. I know exactly what is being offered." "Offered?" Malgorn's voice cut like broken steel. "Cowl's work walks into my hall wearing fresh ceramite and borrowed legitimacy, and I am told to open the veins of my chapter to it. We have guarded Othris through 11 Black Crusade raids, 4 Xenos incursions, 2 Forged secessions, and the Plague Years. We did not beg Mars to remake us." "No," Corda said. "You bled until you could barely stand, then called that purity." Malgorn came closer. The captains beside him shifted. Corda did not move. "We were made by the Emperor's design," Malgorn said. "So were traitors," Corda answered. The hall went still. Malgorn's hand closed around the hilt of his sword. "Choose your next words with care, brother." Corda's face was granite. "I have buried enough brothers to know pride when it wears a death mask. These warriors are not your shame. They are Cawl's ambition." They are Guilliman's necessity. They are untested. Then test them in your colors, but do not pretend extinction is honor, because the alternative wounds your pride. Thelx's lenses clicked. Refusal of reinforcements under current survival conditions constitutes statistical self-murder. Malgorn turned his fury on the envoy. There, hear it. That is what Mars thinks of us. Numbers, decay curves, resource allocation. Not oaths, not blood, not memory. Kale spoke then. He had not intended to, but the Hall's hatred had narrowed into a shape that required cutting. We do not come to erase your dead. Malgorn looked at him, as one might regard a weapon that had spoken out of turn. Kale continued. We were made in darkness. We have no banners older than our awakening, no reliquaries, no fallen brothers in your walls, no honor but what we earn. If you name us replacements, that is your word, not ours. Assign us a breach, a wall, a death oath. We will stand there until relieved or destroyed. One of the Ashen Wardens' captains laughed once, bitterly. You speak well for a vat-born insult. Arven took one step forward. Kale lifted 2 fingers. The Blood Angel's gene sun stopped, barely. The first explosion struck before Malgorn could answer. The Hall of Embers shook. Dust fell from the helms of the dead. The brazier flame roared sideways. Vox channels erupted in overlapping alarm. Outer sanctum breach. Void shield collapse on western ridge. Teleport signatures within the lower reliquary. Traitor Astartes. Traitor Astartes within the walls. The fortress monastery had been dying for so long that its enemies had learned where to cut. Malgorn drew his sword. Its blade came alive with a field of pale fire. All wardens to arms. Corda sealed his helm. Kale. Ready. Thelx's limbs lifted, exposing a compact arc weapon beneath his robes. Debate suspended by enemy validation. No one had time to hate him for it. The cathedral corridors became a butcher's throat. The attackers came through teleport flare and breached stone. Heretic Astartes, in rust red and black plate, their armor marked with burning scripture and flayed parchment. Word-bearers, or something descended from them, though their icons had been scratched over with newer madness. Cult shock troops poured after them, howling praises to gods who answered in mutation and fire. Possessed bodies crawled along walls, their limbs bending the wrong way, their mouths full of lamprey teeth. The monastery's serfs died first, cut down while trying to seal blast doors or drag ammunition carts clear. Their blood washed over the carved names in the floor. Primaris and Firstborn met the assault together, because pride had no time to arrange distance. Kale's bolt rifle kicked against his shoulder. At close range, the weapon did not kill so much as detonate meaning. A cultist's torso burst open, ribs flung outward, organs painting the corridor wall. A traitor legionary took 3 shots to the chest and staggered, armor cratered, black blood spraying from cracked plate. Marius finished him with a burst through the throat seal. The helm snapped backward and came free in a mist of gore. Malgorn's Ashen Wardens fought like men defending their own tombs. They knew every alcove, every murder hole, every relic niche large enough for cover. One Firstborn with a cracked helm braced beside Sarkhan and fired until his bolter jammed. A possessed thing leapt at him, its jaw split down to the sternum. Sarkhan intercepted it, drove his combat blade into its mouth, and fired his sidearm through the back of its skull. The Firstborn cleared the jam, glanced once at the Primaris, and returned to killing. In the Chapel of Severed Oaths, chainswords clogged with meat. Arven met a heretic Astartes in the center aisle between statues of dead chapter masters. The traitor swung a chain blade wrapped in skin. Arven parried, struck, and drove his own chainsword into the enemy's abdomen. The teeth bit, screamed, slowed as corrupted intestines and armor cabling tangled in the mechanism. The traitor laughed and headbutted him. Arven snarled back with a sound that was too close to hunger. Corda appeared beside him and punched his power fist through the traitor's spine from behind. Bone fragments and black brain fluid burst from the enemy's mouth as the captain ripped him apart. "Control," Corda voxed. Arvin yanked his clogged chainsword free. "I have it." "Then prove it." In the hall of sarcophagi, the dreadnoughts woke. Ancient Brother Cadron was first, his coffin form rising from its alcove on grinding pistons, sarcophagus faceplate carved with a warrior's death mask. His assault cannon spun before he had fully stepped clear. Possessed cultists vanished beneath the barrage, reduced to sprays of meat, bone chips, and warp-slick vapor. Another dreadnought, Brother Holst, advanced with a seismic tread that cracked the floor. A demon-swollen body hurled itself at him, claws digging furrows in his armor. Holst seized it in his power fist and crushed until the thing burst, showering his sarcophagus with ichor and half-formed organs. "I remember your stink," Holst thundered through ancient vox speakers. "I killed your kind when your masters still had names worth cursing." The traitors were not raiding for slaughter alone. They were driving for the gene seed vault. Kale realized it when Corvin's reconnaissance feed cut across his helm display. Enemy icons moving through lower transit corridors. Melter charges. Dark Mechanicum code worms assaulting sealed doors. The Ashen Wardens' future lay beneath the monastery in cold vaults and sanctified stasis caskets. What little gene seed remained. What dead brothers had left behind. What the Primaris were meant to save. "Gene vault," Kale voxed. "Enemy spearhead converging. All available units redirect." Malgorn answered at once. "That vault is ours. Then we hold it together." There was a fractional pause. "Move," Malgorn ordered. The fight at the Gene Vault doors was intimate and obscene. No grand maneuver, no clean fire line, just ceramite bodies smashing together in a corridor too narrow for dignity. Traitor Astartes pushed behind a screen of warp-mutated shields, cultists packed so tightly that every bolt round killed more than one. The air became impossible to breathe for mortals. Blood mist thickened. Heat shimmered from muzzle flare. Men slipped on organs. Armor boots crushed hands, skulls, icons, and spent magazines into the floor. Brother Marius died there. He took a melter blast meant for the vault hinge. His Mark 10 plate held for a heartbeat, then the heat ate through him. He did not fall immediately. Dawn's stubbornness, Cowl's augmentation, and his own will kept him upright long enough to step into the breach and fire his bolt rifle into the melter-bearer's face. The traitor's head burst inside its helm. Marius turned, half his torso glowing, one arm burned to the bone beneath melting ceramite. "Gate holds," he voxed. Then a chain axe took him through the neck. His head came away in a spray of blood and black carapace cabling. His body remained standing for 2 seconds, firing by dying reflex, before it collapsed against the vault threshold. An Ashen Warden apothecary saw it. He saw a Primaris die not for glory, not to shame the firstborn, not to replace the chapter's dead, but to keep the vault sealed. He drove forward with his Narthesium extended, not to save Marius, who was beyond saving, but to harvest what could be honored. A traitor lunged for him. Kale intercepted the blow on his pauldron, felt ceramite crack, and emptied half a magazine into the enemy's chest at arm's length. The traitor came apart across him, ribs and armor fragments hammering his breastplate. Malgorn reached the vault doors with his last reserve. His sword burned through possessed flesh. His captains died around him. Corda held the right flank, shielded by an Ashen Warden, whose name Kale did not know, and would later ask for. Arvin fought silently now, all rage focused into exact murder. Sarkhan dragged a wounded firstborn behind the line with one hand, while firing with the other. Corvin killed the enemy warpsmith by emerging from a vent shaft behind him and driving a blade up under the skull. When the last traitor died, he died clawing at the Gene Vault door, fingers scraping uselessly across adamantium, while Kale crushed his spine beneath one boot and fired into the back of his helm. The silence afterward was made of burning. The corridor was carpeted with bodies. Smoke crawled along the ceiling. The gene vault doors were dented, scorched, streaked with blood, but sealed. Marius lay at the threshold, headless, his armor cooling. Beside him were 3 Ashen Wardens, a fallen Primaris Hellblaster, 2 chapter serfs who had died carrying ammunition, and half of something possessed that continued twitching until Corda shot it again. Chapter Master Malgorn stood before the vault, breathing hard through a cracked vox grill. He looked at Marius. He looked at the apothecary kneeling beside the body, extracting the gene seed with the same reverence he would have shown any brother of the chapter. The hatred had not left Malgorn's face, but it had changed shape. Later, in the Hall of Embers, beneath the helms of the dead and the smoke of funeral braziers, the surviving Ashen Wardens gathered with the Primaris. The bodies had been taken away. The blood had not yet been cleaned. No one had asked the serfs to scrub it. Not yet. Some stains deserved to remain until the memory settled. Malgorn stood before Kale and the remaining torchbearer warriors. Corda waited to one side, battered and silent. Thelxa Vey hovered behind them, recording everything, wisely saying nothing. The chapter master held Marius's recovered gene seed casket in both hands. "You will wear our dead," Malgorn said. His voice was bitter, not grateful, not softened. No warrior in that hall wanted softness from him. He looked from Kale to Arven, to Sarkhan, to Corvin, to the ranks of Primaris, who would soon take Ashen Warden Grey. "Earn the weight." Kale knelt. One by one, the others followed. The rites began before the blood dried. Chaplains marked their armor with ash from the chapter braziers. Apothecaries spoke the names of dead wardens, whose gene legacy would continue through warriors born in Cawl's vaults, but claimed now by older oaths. Relic helms watched from the walls. Dreadnought sarcophagi stood silent in their alcoves, ancient warriors listening from the edge of sleep. When the ash was pressed to Kale's brow, he understood what Cawl had never made. Cawl had made organs. He had made strength. He had made the furnace in the chest, the coil in the sinew, the towering body, and the obedient mind. He had made weapons that could stand where lesser flesh broke. But this was not in the vat, not in the gene code, not in the cold arithmetic of survival. The dead looking down from the walls. The bitter acceptance of a chapter too proud to vanish quietly. The weight of names carved beneath boots. The right to bleed under another brother's banner and be judged by ghosts. Cawl had created bodies. Chapters forged souls. Armageddon had never ended. It had only changed the names of the dead. The world turned beneath a sky the color of old bruises, wrapped in smoke, ash, and orbital fire. Hive cities rose from the poisoned wastes like blackened mountain ranges, their flanks studded with gun towers, cathedral stacks, manufactorum chimneys, and hab tiers packed with the exhausted billions of the Imperium's most stubborn refuse. Between the hives sprawled the ash wastes, endless grey murder plains, where promethium burned in rivers, and rusted tank hulls lay half-buried like the bones of extinct beasts. The air itself tasted of oil, metal, cordite, and corpse smoke. No wind crossed Armageddon clean. It carried soot, plague dust, engine fumes, orc spores, and the ground remains of men. Kale Vortigern had seen dying worlds. Armageddon was different. It did not die. It endured slaughter with industrial patience. The tactical display inside his helm showed a war zone too vast for comprehension, and therefore fit for command. Hive Acheron's eastern shield line was collapsing. The Steel Legion had lost 6 mechanized corridors in a single day. Demonic manifestations had been reported in the lower sump districts, where exhausted militia had begun burning their own dead without waiting for ecclesiarchy sanction. Orc speed freaks controlled the outer ash routes, cutting reinforcement columns apart before they could reach the hive gates. Vox traffic came in layers of desperation, each channel dense with artillery requests, casualty reports, ammunition shortages, machine spirit failures, and prayers disguised as orders. Guilliman was not coming. Not here, Not now. The Primarch's war spanned too many burning maps. He could not place his sword at every breach, or his command at every dying world. That was the truth of the Indomitus crusade, and the truth tasted bitter even through filtered air. So Kale had been sent in his stead with a Primaris strike group, a blade no larger than a sliver compared with the planetary butcher's work, but sharp enough, perhaps, to cut the tendon of an enemy offensive before the hive fell. Their Thunderhawk came in low through a sky crowded with aircraft and flak. Steel Legion marauders roared toward the horizon in formation, their bellies opening to drop bomb loads across Orc armor columns. Dakajets screamed up to meet them, painted red, yellow and black, wings patched with scrap plate, engines coughing smoke and impossible speed. They came laughing over open vox bands, Orc pilots howling challenges as their guns spat streams of crude shells. Aircraft died in tangled blossoms of flame. One marauder lost a wing and kept flying for several seconds, carving a burning path through a flock of Orc craft before it struck the ash waste and vanished in a tower of dirt, fuel, and bodies. Below, the war was a moving continent of violence. Steel Legion columns crawled across the wastes in disciplined blocks. Chimeras, Lehman Russ battle tanks, basilisks and fuel carriers moving behind screens of infantry in greatcoats and rebreathers. Their officers stood in cupolas beneath falling ash, sabres raised, voices flat over vox as they ordered men forward into certain death, because certain death was preferable to a breach in the line. Skitari cohorts marched on the right flank, red robes snapping over metal limbs, galvanic rifles discharging in perfect volleys through radioactive storm haze. Servitor gun lines stood chained to firing platforms, heavy weapons fused into their arms, skulls empty of fear and therefore almost envied by the mortals dying around them. The Orcs came faster. Speed freaks poured across the ash plains in a roaring tide of engines, guns, wheels, tracks, and iron stupidity elevated by numbers into genius. Warbikes leapt trenches, scrap buggies drifted through shell craters, gunners firing wildly with no concern for aim because the horizon was full of targets. Trucks rammed burning chimeras and disgorged mobs of boys before exploding under return fire. Knobs in crude armor stood on vehicle roofs, waving choppers and power claws, bellowing for more speed, more noise, more killing. Their joy was a battlefield force. Their laughter carried over the vox like gravel fed through a grinder. At their center thundered war boss Grook Ironjaw. His battle wagon was a moving fortress of scrap plates, exhaust stacks, tusked glyphs and chained skulls, its wheels taller than hab blocks, its forward ram painted with dried blood and fresh impact meat. Grook himself stood in the open command cage, enormous even among his kind, one side of his jaw replaced by a slab of iron bolted through green flesh. He wore tank plates as armor and carried a power claw that sparked with stolen force field energy. Around him, Orcs chanted his name until the rhythm became part of the engine roar. A Steel Legion tank shell struck the battle wagon's frontal plate and detonated. Fire washed over Grook. He leaned into it, laughing so hard blood sprayed from his gums. "Dat all?" he roared. "Come on, you tin humies. Hit me proper." A formation of blue-armored Primaris appeared on a distant ridge, disembarking from grav transports under covering fire. Grook's red eyes widened with delight. "The blue humies is bigger. Good. They'll make a louder crunch." The Orc horde surged. Kale landed at Hive Acheron's outer bastion as the eastern gate shook under bombardment. He stepped from the Thunderhawk into a yard carpeted with wounded men, spent casings, discarded rebreathers, and body bags that no one had time to seal. Hive militia huddled behind barricades of plasteel and corpse crates, their faces grey beneath soot, their eyes hollow from too many hours without sleep. Some were eating corpse starch from dented tins, while artillery shook dust from the walls above them. Others prayed around laser guns with cracked stocks and bayonets stained black. A Black Templar's marshal strode past with a squad of crusaders, black armor scored by ash and flame, tabards stiff with blood. Their chainswords snarled as they moved toward the gate. None looked at the wounded. Pity was not their task. Hatred was. On another platform, Salamander's flame units prepared Prometheum tanks beneath the supervision of their tech marines. Green armor glowed in the firelight. Their sergeants spoke to nearby militia with grim patience, directing them away from expected burn corridors. The Salamanders would kill the enemy with fire, but not waste loyal lives through carelessness, if time allowed. On Armageddon, such restraint looked almost gentle. It still smelled of burning meat. Corda met Kale near a command hololith that flickered every time the hive void shields absorbed another impact. The Imperial Fist's armor was cracked across the breastplate and painted with ash so thick his yellow plate looked grey. The Orc offensive is not the true wound, Corda said without greeting. Kale reviewed the shifting runes. The gargant. Corda nodded toward the horizon. Through the smoke, something moved above the ash storm. It was too large to be a tank, too crude to be a titan, too alive with noise to be dismissed as machinery. The Orc gargant lurched forward on piston legs, a mountain of scrap iron, guns, glyph plates, and roaring furnaces. It walked behind the speed freak assault, slow but unstoppable, its weapon arms spitting shells the size of landing. Craft. Every step crushed trenches flat. Its belly guns vomited fire into steel legion formations. Its head was a snarling iron face with lamps for eyes, and from its back flew banners made of looted armor, imperial flags, and stitched human skin. If that reaches the eastern gate, Corda said, Hive Acheron opens. And if the hive opens, Kale said, the lower districts become an orc breeding pit before nightfall. Before nightfall, before dawn, before any word makes the loss sound less final. Kale's strike group could not win Armageddon. No force could win Armageddon in a day, or a year, or perhaps in any meaningful sense. But the gargant was the pressure point. Destroy it, and the speed freak assault would lose its iron god. The orcs would not retreat in fear, but they would surge stupidly into the confusion, and confusion could be harvested. Kale issued the orders. Intercessors secured the hive breach corridors, locking their fields of fire with Steel Legion heavy weapon teams. Hellblasters moved to the upper bastion to burn through the gargant's escort walkers. Aggressors reinforced the trenches where orc mobs had already reached bayonet distance. Rivers deployed through maintenance tunnels and ash drains toward enemy signal rigs, their skull helms vanishing into smoke. Kale took Corda, Arvin, Sarkhan, Corvin, and 2 assault squads toward the gargant by Stormraven insertion. They crossed the battlefield under a ceiling of murder. The Stormraven flew so low, its wake threw ash in waves. Orc fire hammered its hull. Rockets streaked past, some detonating in the air, others corkscrewing into the ground and blowing apart guardsmen, orcs, and wrecks without discrimination. Below, aggressors stood in trenches with bolt-storm gauntlets blazing, drowning oncoming boys in explosive fire. Orcs died in chunks and kept coming, slipping in their own blood, trampling the wounded, laughing as their friends burst apart. A salamander's squad washed a breach with Prometheum, and the orcs inside became living torches, running forward until the fire ate their lungs and dropped them twitching into the mud. A demon pack erupted from the flank, drawn by the scale of slaughter. Bloodletters came bounding through the smoke, blades raised, their bodies slick red beneath the poisoned rain. Black Templars met them with hymns and chainswords. The clash lasted seconds and felt eternal. Brass blades opened space marine armor. Chainswords tore demon flesh that dissolved into steam and hate. A Templar lost his arm, caught his falling sword in the other hand, and rammed it through a demon's throat while shouting praise through a vox grill full of blood. Armageddon took all offerings and asked for more. The Stormraven reached the Gargant's shadow. Kale's squad launched by Grav shoot, slamming onto the machine's upper gantries beneath streams of heavy fire. Orcs turned toward them in delight. The first nob to reach Kale swung a chopper larger than a mortal man. Kale ducked beneath it, drove his combat blade through the Orc's throat, and fired his bolt rifle into the wound. The head came off in a burst of green blood, teeth and spinal meat. They forced their way toward a maintenance hatch welded from stolen Imperial tank doors. Sarkhan burned the hinges with melter fire. Korda kicked the hatch inward, crushing an Orc behind it against the wall with a wet crack. Inside, the gargant was worse than any beast. Its corridors were tunnels of heat, oil, fungus, and old blood. Pipes shook overhead, engines hammered like chained giants. The walls were covered in glyphs, trophies, dangling wires, and crude repairs. Human bodies had been nailed up along the passage, guardsmen, hive militia, crewmen, some dead, some not yet dead enough. Their uniforms had been stripped for decoration. Their faces were swollen, tongues black, eyes open beneath layers of soot. Orc fungus grew in the corners and through the mouths of corpses. Grots scurried underfoot, carrying tools, ammunition belts, and severed fingers as snacks. Arven killed the first mob in the corridor with controlled bursts that became less controlled as the Orcs closed. His chainsword came free when ammunition ran low, teeth screaming through green muscle and thick bone. Corvin moved ahead through side ducts, eliminating gunners and signal runts in silence. Sarkhan planted charges on ammunition hoppers, pausing only to burn the bodies of the still living. Nailed to the wall when they begged for death through cracked lips. It was not mercy as mortals understood it. It was the only mercy left. Korda held the rear. The first nobs hit like a landslide. They came with iron jaws, trophy racks, cleavers, power claws, and the stench of meat and engine smoke. Korda met them in a doorway barely wide enough for his armor. His storm shield took the first blow and cracked. His power fist crushed an Orc's skull flat, driving tusks up through its own brain. Another nob slammed into him, pinning him against the frame. A third drove a jagged blade under his pauldron and into the meat beneath. Korda grunted and did not fall. "Move," he voxed. "Charges first." Kale turned from the reactor access panel. "Korda, do your duty." The knob with the blade twisted it. Blood poured down Korda's side. The Imperial fist's shield arm sagged. Another power claw closed around his helm, metal shrieking as it began to crush. Kale crossed the corridor in 3 strides. He fired point blank into the first nob's knee, blowing the joint apart, then rammed his shoulder into the second hard enough to drive it back into the mob behind. The power claw scraped across Korda's helm and tore away one side of the grille. Kale seized the Orc's wrist with both hands and wrenched. Bone and crude augmetic metal snapped together. The Orc bellowed. Kale drove his combat blade up beneath its jaw and into the brain, then fired his sidearm through the hilt until the skull came apart from within. Korda staggered. Kale caught him before he fell. For a heartbeat, only the gargant's engine spoke. Then Korda's voice came over the vox, rough with pain and static. "On your feet, brother." Kale tightened his grip and hauled him upright. "Yes, brother." They fell back toward the reactor chamber as the charges armed. Plasma bombs fixed to the gargant's crude power core pulsed with escalating light. Orc alarms began to sound, not sirens but bells, horns and shouting. Grook's voice thundered through the gargant's internal vox, loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. "Who's mucking about in me belly? I'll rip your legs off and race with 'em." Kale checked the timer rune. Extraction. The squad fought its way out through a storm of Orcs and exploding machinery. Corvin died almost without sound, dragged down by a burner boy whose fuel tank detonated in a corridor junction. The blast consumed them both, leaving only blackened armor fragments and green blood cooked onto the walls. Sarkhan recovered Corvin's gene seed under fire while Arven held the corridor, snarling every oath through clenched teeth. They leapt from the gargant's flank as the plasma charges reached ignition. The explosion began inside the machine and climbed outward. Blue-white light punched through seams in the armor. The gargant staggered, one leg locking, the other grinding forward by dying momentum. Its belly split open, vomiting fire, orcs, debris, and molten machinery. Its head roared with Grook's fury until the vox cut into static. Then the reactor went. The gargant fell into the orc horde. It came down like a collapsing hive spire, crushing thousands beneath its burning bulk. Speed freak vehicles swerved too late, vanishing under iron plates and exploding fuel tanks. Orc mobs cheered until the shadow swallowed them. The impact threw a wave of ash, fire, and body parts across the plain. Hive Acheron's eastern wall shook. The Steel Legion line disappeared in dust, then reappeared still firing. The Orc offensive broke its own shape. Not ended. Never ended. But the spearhead became a brawl, then a riot, then 1,000 smaller fights that Imperial artillery could punish. Basilisks opened up. Hellblasters burned surviving walkers. Salamander's flame units sealed the nearest breaches. Black Templars drove into the stunned mobs with blades raised and murder hymns roaring. Steel Legion tanks advanced over churned corpses, guns firing until barrels split. Hive Acheron lived. The ash wastes did not return to Imperial hands. Grook Ironjaw's body was not found. Demons still hunted the lower districts. Orc spores would bloom in the dead for years. The casualty reports would take months to compile and would still be lies by omission. Millions had died in the immediate theatre. Billions still fought across Armageddon's continents, hives, fire wastes, refinery fields, and orbital approaches. The world had swallowed another army and demanded another. Kale stood on the eastern wall as black rain began to fall. It was not water. It was soot, oil vapor, atomized blood, and the powdered remains of men and orcs, lifted by heat and returned by a poisoned sky. Corda stood beside him, armor breached, helm ruined, one side of his face dark with dried blood. Neither spoke for a long while. Below them, Imperial guns shifted east. The war had moved 10 kilometers. That was all. Hive Acheron was saved, the ash wastes remained lost, and Armageddon continued beneath a rain of soot and blood, grinding victory and defeat into the same red mud. Armageddon's ash still clung to them when the summons came. It sat in the joints of their armor, in the gouges cut across ceramite, in the blackened seals where promethium flame had licked too close and orc blades had bitten too deep. It dried in the cracks of gauntlets as grey mud made from soot, oil, and the powdered remains of the dead. Even after the rites of cleansing, even after the chapter serfs had scraped blood from plate and fed prayers into the armor's machine spirit, Kale Vortigern could still smell the world on himself. Armageddon had a way of remaining. It marked steel, flesh, and memory with the same patient cruelty. The honor of terror translated with the battered remains of his strike group into the shadow of Cawl's mobile forge vessel. The ship was not merely a vessel. It was a moving fragment of Mars, given engines and permission to trespass upon the void. Its hull stretched across the stars like a continent of iron, red and black, crowned with manufactorum towers, macro cranes, weapon shrines, data spires and furnace stacks that burned even in vacuum through caged plasma vents. Smaller craft moved around it in endless procession: lighters, tugs, mechanicus cutters, coffin barges, armory shuttles, and medici craft, heavy with wounded transhumans. Servo skulls swarmed outside its docking spines in clouds, their eye lenses glowing like embers shaken from a fire. The ship's name in formal Binharic was long enough to be a litany. The Crusade fleet called it the Forge of Dominion. Corda called it Cawl's crawling blasphemy, and made no effort to lower his voice. Kale's force came aboard through a docking cathedral, where the ceiling vanished into smoke and red light. Skitarii stood in silent ranks along the embarkation path, radium carbines locked across their metal chests. Above them hung banners of Mars, the Aquila, the Cog, and seals of authorization bearing Guilliman's own command cipher. Servitors dragged carts of ruined armor toward reclamation shrines. Wounded Primaris were carried past on suspensor slabs, some missing limbs, some sealed inside emergency sarcophagi of plasteel and prayer, some too still to be alive, but not yet surrendered to death. Their blood dripped through drainage grills and vanished into the ship's digestive machinery. Farther in, thousands more awakened from stasis. Kale saw them through an armor-glass wall as he marched toward the inner apothecarian. Ranks of pale giants stood in thawing light, frost sliding from their skin, their eyes opening to the red gloom of the forge vessel. Tech adepts moved among them with injector wands and data tethers. Armor servitors waited with Mark 10 plate mounted on skeletal frames. The newly awakened did not speak much. They asked the same questions Kale's own cohort had asked when the galaxy tore open around them: command authority, enemy disposition, armor issue, ammunition allotment. The dead of Armageddon were already becoming gaps in a ledger. The living replacements were stepping into those gaps before grief could harden around them. Cawl understood timing better than mercy. Kale was taken to a chamber that resembled both shrine and abattoir. Surgical lamps burned above slabs of black marble veined with silver circuitry. Incense poured from censers shaped like skulls and engine pistons, failing to hide the smell of opened bodies. Mechanicus adepts chanted in layered machine cant, while servo arms clicked and adjusted their instruments. Along the walls, organs pulsed inside stasis jars. Gene seed caskets rested beneath purity seals. A row of severed limbs hung in suspension fields awaiting study, replacement, or reverent disposal. Belisarius Cawl waited at the center of the chamber. He had no need to stand still, yet he did. An enormous, red-robed mass of iron, bone, cable, and impossible age. His lenses rotated as Kale approached. Mechadendrites unfolded from beneath his robes, some tipped with needles finer than hair, others with blades bright enough to cut thought from flesh. His attention fixed not on Kale's face, nor on the scorched marks across his armor, nor on the way the Primaris sergeant's gait betrayed wounds not yet healed. Cawl looked at the place beneath Kale's ribs, where the Belisarian furnace had ignited. "Remove the breastplate," Cawl said. Kale obeyed, because there was no reason not to, and because refusal would have wasted time. Servitors moved in with clamps and release keys. The chest plate came away with a hiss of seal pressure, exposing the black carapace beneath and the livid surgical bruising around the wound Grook's war had reopened. The scar from Karan still ran pale and ugly beneath newer trauma. When the armor came free, the apothecarian air touched raw flesh, and Kale's secondary heart tightened in reflex. Cawl extended a needle limb. It pierced Kale's side without warning. Pain flared. Kale did not move. Belisarian furnace activation occurred under chain axe trauma in the Karan engagement, Cawl said. Secondary activation stress noted during Armageddon deployment, residual thermal scarring present, coagulation efficiency elevated, cardiac stabilization successful, pain response contained. The needle withdrew. Another took blood from higher between the ribs. A third scanned the organ through layers of meat and implanted systems. Kale looked down at the Archmagos. "You sound pleased." "I am pleased. Your survival generated excellent confirmation. My pain generated excellent confirmation." "Correct. A lesser man would have struck him. A mortal would have called him monster. A chaplain might have turned the moment into a sermon." Kale stood beneath the surgical lamps and let anger move through him without command. It found no purchase. That did not make it absent. "We died on Armageddon," Kale said. "Corvin, Marius before him at Othris, others whose names you read only as depletion. We bled in defense of gene vaults, hives and corridors you will never walk except as data." Cowl's lenses widened with something like interest. "I walk them now through you. That is not honoring them. Honor is a chapter function. Preservation is mine." Kale's jaw tightened. "Are we sons of the Emperor or instruments of your vanity?" Several adepts stopped chanting. Corda, who had entered with the wounded and remained near the doorway, turned his battered helm slightly. His cracked face was unreadable, but his attention sharpened. Cawl did not react with anger. That would have made him smaller. Instead, he answered with terrifying sincerity. Both, potentially. The distinction is sentimental, not functional. The words entered the room like a blade laid gently on an altar. Kale stared at him. You believe that? I believe in results. You may drape them in whatever familial symbolism improves morale. Son, angel, brother, weapon, miracle, blasphemy. Each term is a handle placed upon a thing to guide the hands that use it. Your essence remains performance under existential pressure. You were designed to survive conditions that render prior assets insufficient. Corda stepped away from the door. Prior assets. Cowl's lenses shifted to him. Adeptus Astartes Firstborn, foundational template of extraordinary success and unacceptable attrition under current strategic collapse. The Imperial Fist's face hardened. You speak of the Emperor's angels as if they are spent ammunition. Spent ammunition saved the Imperium for 10,000 years. It is not insult to note that magazines must be refilled. Corda took another step forward. You always find a way to make necessity sound like contempt. I have contempt for waste, Captain Corda, not for warriors. Warriors are among the few Imperial resources that justify their own veneration. Kale said nothing. He felt the furnace within him, quiet now, coiled and waiting. The organ was Call's answer to death, not mercy. Defiance engineered into tissue. Call turned, and with a twitch of several limbs, summoned the chamber wall to open. Beyond it lay the armory. It extended farther than Kale's enhanced sight could comfortably judge. A vault of war, stretching through the forge vessel's spine. Rows of Mark X Tacticus plates stood upright in armored frames, each suit black and unpainted, waiting for chapter colors, campaign scars, and the slow acquisition of ghosts. Servo arms moved from suit to suit, anointing seals, aligning fiber bundles, awakening machine spirits with bursts of Binharic prayer. Bolt rifles rested in weapon racks by the thousands, each one tagged, blessed, oiled and fed ammunition from auto-sanctifiers that counted, polished and consecrated every round before loading. Plasma incinerators hung in cooling cradles, their coils pulsing with restrained starfire. Nearby, grav tanks slept on mag platforms, their machine spirits murmuring through diagnostic chants, while red-robed priests soothed them with sacred oils. Farther still were the sarcophagi. Redemptor dreadnought shells stood in silent ranks, broader and more brutal than the ancient castroferum patterns Kale had seen in chapter vaults. Their empty sarcophagi were open, waiting for broken heroes whose bodies had not yet accepted death. The machines looked hungry, not maliciously. Hungrily as a battlefield is hungry, as the Imperium is hungry, as every weapon built in the 41st millennium is hungry for the flesh required to give it meaning. This is the shape of my genius, Cawl said. His voice carried no humility. It did not need to. The armory was too vast for modesty. Not merely your additional organs, not merely increased size, strength, durability, endurance or combat viability. A single improved warrior is an indulgence. 1,000 are a force. Tens of thousands, prepared in secrecy, armed in parallel, supported by new armor patterns, new vehicles, stabilized gene seed protocols, scalable war gear production, and deployable reinforcement structures, become strategic correction. Kale watched newly awakened Primaris receiving armor in the distance. Some bore the gene line of Guilliman, others of Dawn, Vulcan, Corax, Sanguinius, and the rest of the loyal dead or absent fathers. They stood without banners, yet every one of them would soon be folded into a chapter, crusade force or new founding. Cawl had not made a hero. He had made a reserve against apocalypse. The Imperium did not require one miracle, Cole continued. It required logistics disguised as miracle, stable gene seed, mass implantation success, armor that could adapt to battlefield roles, weapons suited to the new physiology, dreadnought patterns able to house warriors too damaged for flesh but too valuable for death, production chains embedded across forge worlds, torchbearer protocols, stasis preservation, strategic timing. This is why the project matters. This is why it is my greatest work. Not because I made you taller, because I made you arrive when extinction believed itself unopposed. Corda looked toward the far side of the armory, where another line of slabs had been arranged beneath white surgical lamps. And that? Cowl's silence was brief. The Rubicon Primaris. They walked to the observation gallery above the surgical rows. Firstborn space marines lay opened on marble slabs. Some were veterans so damaged by war that they had arrived as little more than armored ruin and stubborn pulse. Others had volunteered because Guilliman's command had made survival a duty greater than tradition. Apothecaries worked beside Mechanicus surgeons in tense cooperation, white armor and red robes moving around bodies that had already endured centuries of battle and now faced Cowl's future under knives. Corda gripped the railing. Below, a firstborn warrior of the Ashen Wardens convulsed as new organs rejected the old rhythms of his body. His back arched, muscles tore beneath the skin. An apothecary barked orders while surgical arms plunged into the open chest cavity. Blood sprayed across the marble. The warriors' hearts fought the transformation like caged beasts. For several seconds, Kale thought he might live. Then his primary heart burst. The body kicked once, twice. The helm set beside the slab stared upward with empty lenses. The apothecary lowered his head. The Mechanicus surgeon recorded the failure. On the next slab, another firstborn survived. His body shook as the Magnificat took hold. Sinew coils settled into old muscle. The furnace nested in a chest that had already been scarred by wars older than Kale's waking memory. He screamed once, not in fear, but in rage at the indignity of pain. Then the scream became a growl. His heart stabilized. The apothecary pressed a bloodied gauntlet to the warrior's brow. "He lives," Corda said. Cowl's lenses clicked. "Some do." Below, another died opened from throat to pelvis, organs refusing the future with wet finality. "Some do not," Cawl added. Corda turned on him, fury held in the clenched discipline of a son of dawn. "You cut open heroes on slabs and call it correction. You bury boys in tanks and call them salvation. You raise weapons in secret for 10,000 years. You decide which deaths are useful. Do you never tire of playing God?" Cawl looked at him for a long moment. When he answered, the chamber seemed to dim around the words. "Gods in this galaxy are predators, Captain Corda. They drink souls, rot stars, crown murderers, whisper from wounds in reality, and laugh while species burn. If your accusation is that I have stolen some portion of their arrogance in order to deny them mankind's corpse, then yes, accuse me. Engrave it on Mars, chant it in your fortress chapels. I would rather be accused than extinct." Corda had no answer that did not begin with hatred and end in usefulness. He turned back to the slabs instead. Kale watched a dying firstborn's hand close around an apothecary's wrist. The warrior's mouth moved. His voice did not reach the gallery, but Kale did not need to hear it. He knew the shape of final oaths. The dead did not vanish in Cowl's work. They became structure. They became warning. They became correction. The horror was that the Archmagos was not lying. Every corpse had been used, every failure remembered in the next success, every scream translated into a chance that some other brother would stand longer in the breach. That was the shape of the genius. Not clean, not noble, not kind, effective. The forge vessel's alarms sounded before the next warrior's fate was known. They began as a low binharic pulse beneath the floor, then rose into a ship-wide howl. Lumen strips turned crimson. Weapon servitors unfolded from wall alcoves. Across the armory, machine spirits snarled awake. Tech adepts broke into frantic chant. Skitarii cohorts pivoted in perfect unison, rifles coming up. A vox burst tore through the chamber, degraded by static and urgency. Outer auger contact, multiple warp translations, hostile fleet signatures, traitor markings confirmed, demonic contamination probable, enemy heading direct for the Forge of Dominion. Cowl's mechadendrites lashed into a command altar, dragging the starfield into hololithic life above them. Red icons appeared at the edge of the projection, one after another, bleeding out of the warp in attack formation. At their center burned a symbol Kale remembered from Karan. Flayed skin stretched over iron, a red-black wound shaped like a banner. The vox crackled again. This time the voice that emerged was not imperial. "Little Cawl," Lord Varkle the Twice-Flayed whispered across the void, "I have come for your miracle. I will crack your vaults, peel your sons, and teach your stolen future to scream for the gods." Kale reached for his helm. Corda did the same. Cawl watched the enemy fleet approach, lenses brightening not with fear, but calculation. "Excellent," the Archmagos said. "The Predator has mistaken the laboratory for prey." The void battle began before the alarms finished screaming. Varkle's fleet came out of the warp in a wound of red light and black vapor, translating close enough to Cowl's forge vessel that sane navigators would have called the act suicide. Traitor ships burst into real space, with Geller fields shedding sparks of unreality, their hulls slick with frost, blood, and clinging warp matter that writhed like things trying to crawl back into hell. Their prows were bladed and barbed, their flanks chained with trophies, their cathedral towers crowned by flayed banners that snapped though there was no wind to move them. Some had once been imperial. That made them worse. The Aquila had been carved away from their armored skins and replaced with brass skulls, burning runes, and faces stretched across plating in obscene imitation of saints. Cowl's forge vessel answered with every gun it possessed. The Forge of Dominion shuddered as macro batteries fired incontinent-cracking broadsides. Shells the size of hab towers crossed the void and struck Traitor. Cruisers with impacts bright enough to blind Auspex spirits. Lance beams cut through darkness in spears of white sunfire. Mechanicus arc ships rotated into battle formation around their master vessel, their hulls opening like reliquaries to reveal Nova cannon mouths, torpedo tubes, and weapon shrines tended by chanting priests. Imperial Navy cruisers moved between them with disciplined fury, void shields layered, engines burning hard, crews reciting battle catechisms, while officers shouted range corrections over vox channels thick with static. The traitors did not come alone. Demon engines crawled across the void. They moved without regard for orbital mechanics, brass and bone shapes the size of assault landers, winged with torn metal and dragged forward by hatred rather than thrust. Some had cannon mouths set in their bellies. Others were nothing but claws, engines, and screaming faces. They slammed into void shields and detonated in wet flashes of warp fire, or clung to hulls and began chewing through armor plating with drills made from fused teeth. Swarms of attack craft filled the space between fleets, Imperial interceptors and traitor fighters, twisting through storms of flak, plasma, shrapnel, and burning debris. Pilots died too fast for names. Aircraft broke apart in strings of fire and meat. Escape pods launched, then vanished beneath point defense fire, or were swallowed by things with wings. Millions began dying in the first minutes. A Mechanicus cruiser took a lance strike through its midsection and split open from prow to stern. Entire manufactorum decks decompressed at once. Skitarii, adepts, servitors, bonded laborers, and shrine crews were blown into the void in a glittering spray of bodies, tools, ammunition crates, and sacred machinery. Some froze instantly with weapons still locked in their hands. Others spun slowly away from the breach, mouths open around prayers that no atmosphere carried. Inside the dying ship, Gun servitors remained chained to their stations, frost forming over their exposed brains as they continued firing until power failed or their bodies cracked from the cold. A Navy cruiser rammed a traitor frigate after losing steering control. The two ships met bow to flank, armor screaming through Vox pickups as kilometers of metal folded into metal. The Imperial ship's bridge vanished in the impact. The frigate's reactor overloaded seconds later. Both vessels became a sun, and the expanding fireball swallowed 3 wings of attack craft and a cluster of boarding torpedoes already screaming toward the forge vessel. Not enough of them. The rest struck home. Boarding torpedoes hit the forge of Dominion like iron teeth. Some were destroyed by point defenses, their occupants cooked inside their own assault shells. Others punched through armor and buried themselves in the outer vault decks, machine decks, apothecarian galleries, and armory corridors. The torpedoes opened from within. Ramps slammed down into smoke and emergency lumen glow. Heretic Astartes emerged in black, brass, crimson, and skin-pale armor, bolters roaring, chain blades shrieking, icons of the dark gods burning on their plate. Behind them came mutant shock troops, corrupted combat servitors, oathless mortal killers, and priests with their mouths stitched open around blasphemous hymns. The forge vessel's corridors became slaughterhouses. Emergency lumen strips bathed everything in red. Steam vented from ruptured pipes. Deck crews ran with ammunition carts and were cut apart before they reached the lifts. Skitari cohorts formed firing lines across junctions, their galvanic rifles barking in precise volleys until traitor bolter fire tore them into metal-limbed fragments. Servitors burned at their gun mounts, flesh charring, augmetics locking, weapons still firing through the smoke. Tech priests died defending doors because those doors led to data, and data was a form of soul Mars understood. Kale Vortigern met the first wave at Vault Causeway Primus. He stood with his surviving Primaris, Corda's firstborn veterans, and a line of Skitari, whose robes were already blackening from heat. Beyond them stretched the approach to the Gene Vaults, a long adamantium causeway lined with reliquary pillars, ammo shrines, and locked sarcophagus alcoves. Behind those sealed doors slept gene seed archives, Primaris organs, surgical histories, production protocols, Mark X armor templates, and the long hidden shape of Cawl's work. If Varkul reached them, he would not merely destroy warriors, he would poison the future at its source. Corda's voice cut through the squad vox. Do not let them dictate the breach. Old trick. They want us braced at the center. Kale's helm lenses narrowed on the tactical overlay. They are massing center. Yes, that is why they want your eyes there. Kale understood. Corvin would have taken the side gantries. He would have, Corda said. So will they. Kale redirected 2 Primaris fire teams before the Auspex confirmed movement. A heartbeat later, traitor icons appeared along the upper maintenance spans. The Primaris met them with disciplined volleys. Bolt rifle rounds punched heretic Astartes from the gantries, detonating inside armor, spilling corrupted meat and bone down onto the causeway below. Firstborn veterans moved differently, less clean, less symmetrical, filling gaps before the gaps existed, firing at shadows because experience had taught them where enemies wanted to be. Old instinct and new endurance locked together. When the traitor main line charged, the causeway became thunder. Bolters roared from both sides. Bolt rifle fire cracked in flat, controlled bursts. Plasma incinerators screamed as hellblasters burned demon-armored elites into molten slag. Chain axes struck storm shields. Power fists crushed helms. Combat blades found throat seals. Heretic Astartes came laughing through the fire, hating the Primaris with a fury that had sharpened over 10,000 years of defeat and refusal. One traitor in flayed red armor tore the helm from a dead Primaris and held it high. Behold the new lie, he voxed. The Imperium has grown taller because it cannot grow stronger. Corda shot him through the wrist. Kale put a bolt through his mouth grill. The traitor's head burst backward, spraying teeth, black blood and wet brain fragments across the warriors behind him. The vox filled with another voice, deeper and colder. "You are not the Emperor's angel, Kale Vortigern. You are a tech priest's apology." Lord Varkle spoke from somewhere within the attacking fleet, his image bleeding across corrupted vox channels, projected in fragments on broken lumen screens and helmet displays. His flayed armor shimmered in static. His mask of stitched skin smiled without lips. Kale reloaded. Then hear the apology speak in bolt fire. He advanced. The line moved with him. Primaris intercessors stepped into close range and fired into traitor bodies until armor split open and the meat inside burst outward. Corda's firstborn cut into the flanks, not trying to match Primaris' strength, but using centuries of battlefield cruelty to make every strike decisive. A veteran Imperial fist took a chain blade through his abdomen, locked his gauntlets around the attacker's shoulders, and held him still, while Sarkhan burned both of them with a melter blast. The firstborn died without complaint. The traitor died screaming. The assault stalled. Then the vault deck behind them shook. A second breach, not through the causeway, beneath it. Historgan 9 had predicted the possibility and already moved to the lower gene vault with his biologist guard. The Magos stood among stasis reliquaries and data engines as the floor split open and dark mechanicum cutters came shrieking through the adamantium. Mutant servitors crawled from the breach first, their bodies built from stolen flesh and weapon rigs. Behind them came heretic Astartes, bearing plague-black flamers and chain glaives. Historgan 9 did not fight from loyalty to humanity. He did not fight for honor, brotherhood, or the Emperor. The data was under threat. That was enough. His mechadendrites unfolded from beneath his robes. Needles fired toxins into mutant throats. A shoulder-mounted arc weapon spat lightning that cooked 3 corrupted servitors into twitching bone and scrap. His biologist's attendants died around him, shredded by bolter impacts, but they died with data caskets clutched to their chests and extraction protocols running. Historgan 9 sealed 3 vault partitions manually when the cogitator failed, sacrificing his left arm to a closing blast door rather than permit the enemy a path. A traitor Astartes reached him. The warrior wore armor painted with old oaths, scratched into mockery. His chain glaive took Historgan 9 through the torso, ripping metal, robe, cable, and the last wet remnants of organs that had once been human. The Magos did not scream. His lenses flickered, his remaining limbs clamped onto the traitor's armor. "Data continuity preserved," Historgan 9 said. Then he triggered the vault sterilization charge beneath his own body. The blast did not destroy the gene vault. It destroyed the breach, the attackers, and everything living in the lower chamber. Fire washed through the sealed compartment in a white cone of chemical fury. The traitor Astartes vanished from the waist up. Historgan 9 came apart as a scatter of iron, bone, brass, and burning red cloth. His final transmission reached Cawl as a single burst of binharic satisfaction. Useful deviation. Cawl entered battle after that. He did not arrive like a commander. He arrived like Mars had grown legs and decided to murder. The Archmagos descended into Vault Causeway Primus through a ceiling hatch amid a storm of sparks, suspended by anti-grav fields and anchored by mechadendrites that stabbed into walls, floors, and corpses alike. Atomantic shielding blazed around him in a shimmering sphere of pale force. Bolter rounds struck it and vanished in flares of light. Plasma splashed across it and ran aside like rain on glass. His robes opened, revealing weapon limbs, cutting limbs, data spikes, arc projectors, graviton emitters, and surgical tools turned to war. He sang in machine cant. The sound was hideous, beautiful, and too fast for organic thought. Skitari, still capable of receiving the transmission, stiffened and fired with renewed precision. Servitor guns slewed toward targets before their dead brains could process movement. Locked turrets awoke in the walls. armory doors opened and spat floating cherubim bearing ammunition into Primaris' hands. Cowl's arc light struck a cluster of traitors and stripped the flesh from their armor in crackling sheets. A graviton pulse crushed another into the deck, reducing ceramite, bone, and organs into a flat smear that smoked under its own weight. A mechadendrite pierced a heretic Astartes through the eye lens, injected something bright and corrosive, and withdrew as the warrior's head boiled inside his helm. "Archmagos," Kale voxed, firing past him. "The vaults are breached below." "I am aware. Historgan 9 has achieved terminal adequacy." Corda barked a harsh laugh, despite the blood running down his armor. That was almost respect. "Do not exaggerate, Captain." The traitor champion came through the smoke, while Cawl's weapons tore apart the second wave. He was Varkul's chosen, larger than the others, clad in armor made from layered plates of black ceramite and brass ribs. His helm was shaped like a flayed skull, its surface stretched with living skin that blinked where eyes had been grafted into it. He carried a chain axe in one hand and a demon blade in the other, the sword's edge whispering names of dead brothers through the vox. Kale met him before he reached Cawl. Their weapons collided in a storm of sparks. Kale's bolt rifle barked once, twice, 3 times, blowing craters in the champion's breastplate. The traitor kept coming. The chain axe tore across Kale's thigh, chewing armor and meat. The demon blade stabbed beneath his breastplate and slid upward through organs, black carapace, and one of his hearts. Warning runes drowned his sight. Corda shouted his name. Kale fell to one knee. Blood filled his throat. His primary heart failed in a wet, final spasm. His secondary heart hammered alone, too hard, too fast, dying under the load. The champion leaned close enough that Kale saw the stitched eyes on his helm blink in different rhythms. "Cawl's miracle," the traitor whispered, "opened like any other meat." The Belisarian furnace opened. This time it did not wake like a reactor. It detonated. Kale's blood became fire. His nerves screamed, then obeyed. Clotting agents flooded wounds with brutal force. Ruined vessels sealed around the blade still inside him. His dead heart spasmed, refused silence, and struck once more. The furnace drove him upright with such violence that the demon blade snapped against his ribs. Kale seized the champion. Not his weapon, not his throat, his armor. He drove both gauntlets into the rents made by bolt fire and pulled. The traitor roared. Kale pulled harder. Sinew coils shrieked inside his arms. His wounds reopened, blood steaming across his abdomen. The champion punched him in the helm hard enough to crack an eye lens. Kale did not release him. He tore the breastplate outward, splitting corrupted ceramite from its seals, then rammed his fist into the exposed cavity beneath. The traitor's organs were wrong, wet, hot, mutating around his hand. Kale closed his fist around the spine. He ripped upward. The champion came apart inside his own armor. Bone tore free with cables and black meat. Brain matter burst through the helm grill as the spinal column pulled the skull down from within. The demon blade fell. The chain axe died. Kale held the ruined core of Varkul's chosen in one hand, then cast it to the deck. He staggered. Corda caught him. "Still with us, brother?" Kale's vox was a gravelled ruin. Operational. Liar. Accurate enough. Across the ship, Varkul's assault failed by inches and tons and bodies. Boarding parties were cut off. Traitor ships burned under Mechanicus guns. One arc ship rammed a Chaos cruiser and dragged it into the path of Cowl's lance batteries. The Forge of Dominion bled from 100 wounds, but its vaults held. Its armories held. Its stasis ranks held. Varkul's fleet began to withdraw into the warp, mauled but not destroyed. His voice returned over the vox, no longer amused. It shook with hatred deep enough to feel like heat. "Keep your miracle, Cawl. Keep your tall sons, Guilliman. They will only make grander corpses for the gods. I will see them stacked high enough to shadow terror." Cowl's lenses burned in the smoke, his atomantic shield flickering around him. "Your projection lacks supporting evidence." Varkul screamed then, a sound of rage, humiliation, and promised return, as his flagship tore open a warp rift and fled into the bleeding dark. The remaining traitor vessels followed, some burning, some shedding bodies, some laughing through ruptured Vox systems as they vanished back into hell. The Forge vessel did not cheer. It counted the dead. It sealed the breaches. It harvested the fallen. It fed war prayers to wounded machine spirits and prepared the next awakening. Kale stood only because Corda held him upright. Cawl looked at the wound in his chest before looking at his face. "Remarkable activation data," the Archmagos said. Kale coughed blood inside his helm. "You are welcome." Corda looked between them and shook his head. For the first time since Kale had known him, the old Imperial fist sounded almost amused. "Throne preserve us," he said. "You both deserve each other." The Forge vessel lived because too many had died inside it for it to do anything else. The Forge of Dominion drifted beneath the cold gaze of the stars, crippled, venting, scarred across kilometers of sacred hull. Its outer plates were torn open in places where boarding torpedoes had bitten deep. Fire burned in compartments that had been sealed away from atmosphere and crew, flames feeding on chemical spills, ammunition stores, and the last breaths of men trapped behind blast doors. Repair craft crawled across the wounds like iron insects, welding shut breaches, while tech priests chanted appeasement to machine spirits that had endured insult, pain, and invasion. Red hazard lights pulsed along the vessel's flanks. Void shields guttered. Weapon ports smoked. Great sections of the ship had gone dark, their internal systems sacrificed so the vault decks could remain alive. Inside, the decks were carpeted with war. Spent shell casings lay in drifts against the walls, ankle deep in some corridors, brass and blackened metal mixed with teeth, broken purity seals and fragments of armor. Broken servo skulls hung from cables or lay crushed beneath boots, their lenses cracked, their little anti-grav motors twitching in final mechanical spasms. Ruptured power armor had been dragged into piles by chapter serfs and medici servitors, some suits empty, some still containing enough of their owners to require rites before reclamation. Skitari dead sat propped against bulkheads where they had fallen in firing positions, radium carbines locked in metal fingers, robes burned away, exposed augmetics frosted by decompression. Mortal crewmen were stacked in the side passages under grey shrouds because the corpse lifts were jammed and the rendering decks were overfull. The vessel smelled of promethium, hot metal, spilled blood, sacred oils, and the sour stink of opened bodies. Incense burned everywhere, not to comfort the living, but to drown corruption and reassure wounded machinery that its pain had been witnessed. Kale Vortigern walked through it with a new chest. Not entirely new. Nothing in the Imperium was ever entirely new unless it was dangerous. His torso had been opened again beneath Cawl's lamps. Damaged organs had been repaired, reinforced, replaced in part, stitched with synthetic vessels, and wrapped in layers of treated tissue. One heart still beat with an uneven rhythm, though the apothecaries insisted it would stabilize. The Belisarian furnace had burned so violently that its surrounding flesh had charred from within. Cawl's adepts had cut away the dead meat and installed cooling regulation systems no Astartes should have needed, and no mortal could have survived. His black carapace had been re-knit around fresh ports. His ribs ached where replacement segments had been bonded to the old bone. His armor had been rebuilt around the wound. The breastplate bore no ornament yet, only a dark new plate where the traitor's demon blade had entered and failed to finish its work. Kale wore the repair like a verdict. He was alive because Cawl had been right. That knowledge was harder to carry than pain. He passed the lower gene vault, where Historgan 9 had died. The blast doors were scorched white. Mechanicus adepts had sealed the chamber with black wax and data chains. No statue would be raised. No mortal hymn would name the Magos a hero. Mars had already archived his final transmission, preserved his useful fragments, and reassigned his remaining projects. Yet Kale paused before the sealed vault. Corda stopped beside him. The Imperial Fist had also survived, because stubbornness had hardened into biology in the Sons of Dawn long before Cawl had ever dared call endurance an invention. His helm remained damaged, one side replaced by a temporary plate that had not yet been painted yellow. One arm hung in a restraint harness, while bionics beneath the armor recalibrated. He looked at the vault door, then at Kale. "He died for data," Corda said. "Yes. That sounds like an insult. From him, it may have been the closest thing to faith." Corda grunted. "Mars makes poor martyrs, but effective ones." The firstborn did not answer, though the corner of his mouth moved as if resisting something too grim to be amusement. They continued upward, through halls where the living stepped around the dead, because duty left no room for reverent obstruction. Armory crews were already working. That, more than anything, told Kale the ship lived. Mark 10 plate hung in repair frames. Bolt rifles were stripped, cleaned, reconsecrated and reloaded. Plasma coils were cooled in reliquary baths. Redemptor sarcophagi stood open beneath white light, awaiting the shattered bodies of warriors too valuable to bury and too ruined to continue as flesh. New Primaris cohorts stood in thawing ranks behind armor glass, their stasis fields dimming, their first breaths joining the ship's recycled air while the corpses of their predecessors were still warm. The crusade did not pause. It digested loss. Robot Guilliman received the casualty reports in the High Strategium, where the hololithic galaxy still burned in red and violet. He stood alone at first, surrounded by data. The chamber's great windows looked out over the wounded flank of the forge vessel and the escort ships drifting nearby, many of them scarred, some venting atmosphere, some little more than broken hulls awaiting salvage or execution. Around the Primarch, reports hung as translucent panes of light. Loss tallies. Gene seed recovered. Gene seed lost. Primaris casualties. Firstborn casualties. Skitari depletion. Mortal crew deaths. Servitor destruction. Armory damage. Vault integrity. Enemy fleet displacement. Probability of Varkal's return. Guilliman read them all. His face did not change. That was one of the lies of command. Men mistook control for absence. Kale had learned enough to see the weight in the Primarch's stillness. Guilliman looked upon numbers and saw faces whether he wished to or not. A Lord General might hide behind scale. A lesser commander might call millions acceptable because the word saved him from madness. Guilliman saw the full arithmetic and despised that it remained necessary. Cawl waited beside the hololith, enormous and patient, his robes repaired with fresh plates of crimson metal. Several of his mechadendrites had been replaced. One still sparked where a traitor shell had damaged its nerve feed. The Archmagos displayed no fatigue. Perhaps he had abolished it. Perhaps he merely considered it an inefficient confession. When Kale and Corda entered, Guilliman turned. Kale knelt despite the pain in his rebuilt chest. Corda bowed, slower than usual, his damaged arm held stiff. "My lord," Kale said. Guilliman studied him, not as Cawl did, not as a mechanism, not merely as evidence, as a warrior who had been asked to die and had failed at it in the Imperium's favor. "Stand, brother Vortigern." Kale rose. Cowl's lenses clicked. Post-operative condition is satisfactory. Combat redeployment possible after abbreviated recovery interval, assuming no further catastrophic penetration of the thoracic cavity. Corda looked at him. "Your concern is moving." "My concern is accurate." Guilliman ignored the exchange. His gaze remained on Kale's scarred armor, then moved to Corda. "Captain, your assessment." Corda was silent for a long moment. Around him, the strategium hummed with engines, distant alarms, and the low murmur of data priests. The old Imperial Fist looked at Kale as he had once looked at him in the first muster above Terra, when Primaris had been new, tall, well-armed, and untested. His eye and augmetic lens took in the rebuilt plate, the wounds, the stance held despite pain, the record of Othris, Karan, Armageddon, and the vault defense written not in honors, but in survival. Then Corda struck his fist to his breastplate. "Brother Kale Vortigern is Adeptus Astartes," he said. "Not by Call's claim, not by armor issue, not by height, organ count, or Primarch decree alone, by fire, by blood, by standing where death had right of passage and denying it entry." He turned fully toward Kale. "I misjudged you." Kale did not know what to say for half a heartbeat. Hypno-doctrine offered formal responses. Brotherhood offered a simpler one. "You tested us." Corda nodded. "You passed, brother." The word did not heal. It did not restore the dead. It did not make Marius rise, or Corvin return from ash and flame, or Historgan 9 into anything other than scattered metal sealed behind a vault door. But it settled somewhere deeper than Kale expected. Cawl had made him viable. Guilliman had given him purpose. War had given him scars. Corda, in that moment, gave him recognition without softness. Guilliman turned back to the hololithic galaxy. "Further dispersal begins immediately," the Primarch said. "Torchbearer fleets will continue to all reachable chapters. Reinforcement cohorts will be assigned to those below sustainable strength. New chapters of the Ultima Founding will be deployed across priority war zones. Crusade fleets will push into the dark on staggered routes to reduce catastrophic loss if one translation path collapses. Mechanicus assets will distribute armor patterns, weapon schematics, and gene tech under seal. Cawl's vaults will continue production, awakening, and integration." Several officers at the chamber edge bowed and hurried to carry the orders into the wider fleet. Servo skulls sped away. Vox relays opened. Somewhere deep in the forge of Dominion, stasis vaults began to cycle again. Cawl inclined his head with a sound of shifting metal. "The work proceeds." Guilliman looked at him. "You sound satisfied." "I am." "After these losses?" "Because of what the losses failed to achieve. Varkul came to destroy the strategic source of Primaris continuity. He failed. The vaults remain functional. The gene lines remain preserved. Deployment capacity is reduced, not ended. Enemy action confirms the project's significance." Corda muttered, "Only you could call a slaughterhouse confirmation." Cawl's lenses turned toward him. "Battlefields are arguments. This one supports me." Guilliman's eyes hardened. "Then state your argument plainly, Archmagos." Cawl rose taller on his suspensor limbs. There was no humility in him, no pretense of it, no bowed head except as ritual geometry. He looked at the burning map, as though it were a machine whose flaws he had diagnosed before anyone else admitted it was failing. "The Primaris project is my greatest work, because it altered mankind's strategic fate at the precise moment annihilation became mathematically probable, not by sentiment, not by miracle in the vulgar sense, by preparation, 10,000 years of hidden refinement, stabilized gene seed, additional organs, Mark 10 armor, scalable war gear, redemptor sarcophagi, torchbearer distribution, unnumbered suns, new chapters, reinforcement of dying chapters, a reserve army concealed from history until history had no remaining defense against its own collapse. I did not create salvation. Salvation is an imprecise theological category. I created a delay strong enough to kill back." The strategium held the silence after him. Guilliman's face was carved from exhaustion and command. "You have not saved the Imperium, Archmagos. You have bought it the right to keep bleeding." Cawl bowed his vast, monstrous head. "In this millennium, my lord, that is the highest form of victory." No one contradicted him. There was no one honest enough to do so. The orders went out, and the galaxy answered in gunfire. Primaris Marines marched onto ash wastes, where orc warbands roared beneath smoke-black skies, bolt rifles cutting down green tides, while speed freaks circled through burning tank graveyards. Aggressors stood knee-deep in mud and orc blood, their gauntlets vomiting fire until ammunition feeds ran dry, and they fought with fists against choppers and tusks. War bosses laughed, died, rose in the fury of their mobs as new beasts took their names, and the war went on beneath rain made of soot and promethium. In corpse-choked jungles, tyrannids came like hunger-given bodies. Vines sagged under the weight of dead guardsmen and half-eaten beasts. Spores turned the air into poison. Primaris fire teams advanced through digestive mist, bolt rounds detonating in chitin, flamers burning nests that pulsed with unborn organisms. A Redemptor dreadnought crushed gaunts underfoot until the ground itself writhed. Above the canopy, winged shapes blotted out the sun. The sons of Cawl and the Emperor fired upward until the jungle floor became a swamp of alien fluids and human remains. Beneath dead suns, Necrons rose in silence. Their tomb gates opened on worlds long listed as barren. Primaris squads fought through black stone corridors, where gravity bent and time stuttered. Bolt fire shattered living metal, only for it to crawl back together under emerald light. Plasma incinerators burned holes through deathless warriors, whose eyes glowed with contempt, older than Terra's first empires. Captains ordered withdrawal by meters, then counterattack by inches, learning that some enemies did not hate mankind at all. They merely intended to erase it. In burning cathedrals, traitors came laughing. Heretic Astartes crashed through stained glass and prayer smoke, chain axes raised, old grudges written in fresh blood. Primaris and Firstborn met them before altars covered in severed hands and broken aqualas. Chaplains roared litanies, bolt rifles cracked, chainswords snarled and clogged on corrupted meat. The dead fell across pews where pilgrims had prayed hours earlier. Above them, saints of painted glass watched the long war continue beneath their shattered faces. Under the broken light of the Great Rift, demons poured through wounds in reality. They came with brass blades, plague bells, crystal fire and whispers that made mortal minds split. Primaris lines held where men dissolved. Not always, not forever. No weapon held forever in the 41st millennium, but often enough, long enough. A gate remained shut, a relay stayed lit, a forge completed one more production cycle, a chapter survived its next battle, a world lived one more night beneath skies that wanted it dead. Kale Vortigern marched into another war before his wounds had stopped aching. His armor bore new color, new seals, new scars, and the ash mark of rights earned in another chapter's hall. Corda marched beside him for this deployment, not as judge now, but as brother. Around them walked Primaris of many gene lines and firstborn veterans who had stopped asking whether Cawl's sons were real Astartes because the dead had already answered. Ahead lay a launch bay. Beyond it, a world under siege. Beyond that, another, and another, and another, until maps failed and only duty remained. Kale checked his bolt rifle. The machine spirit purred beneath his gauntlets. His heart beat in layered rhythm. Deeper still, the Belisarian furnace slept, waiting for the next moment when death would lay claim and be denied by design. He thought of Cawl then, though not with gratitude. Gratitude was too clean. He thought of the vaults, the dead aspirants, the gene caskets, the armories, the slabs where Firstborn died reaching for the future, the forge vessel bleeding but alive. He thought of Guilliman standing beneath a burning galaxy and naming delay for what it was. He thought of Corda's word, brother. The ramp opened. War waited below in smoke, fire and screaming vox traffic. Kale stepped forward with the others, sealed in ceramite, armed with a bolt rifle, carrying the work of a monster and the oath of an angel. Cawl's greatest work had not been perfection. Perfection belonged to dead dreams and arrogant gods. His greatest work was defiance made flesh, given discipline, given armor, given brothers, and sent into hell without permission to die.